Megan woke up early, washed her face with cool water to cheer herself up, and went straight to the kitchen to make breakfast for the kids. When you have 4 kids, you have to devote a lot of time to this activity. Tom, for example, liked pancakes and Christian liked scrambled eggs. Mummy liked pancakes and Matthew liked oatmeal and cereal with milk. It was impossible to please everyone at the same time. She tried to take turns to avoid arguments. The boys had even set up a schedule and hung it on the wall. Looking at it once again, Megan smiled and remarked aloud, "Okay, today we have a menu for Christian, so I'm making an omelet." But when she opened the old refrigerator, she saw that there were almost no eggs left, only 3 eggs lying orphaned on a shelf with special drawers. How did I forget so easily? Again, I did not buy. A maiden's memory. I should make a list on a piece of paper or set a reminder on my phone, Megan thought with annoyance. There were only 3 eggs and 4 kids. Any way you slice it, that's not enough. But that's okay. I'll make a bigger omelet. It'll be a hybrid day with Christian and Emily's preferences, Megan decided and started cooking. She loved to cook, and she did it with heart. Sometimes it seemed to the kids that their mom was a real magician and could make delicious things out of literally nothing. But the true passion of her life for Megan has always been baking pancakes, pies, buns with filling, shortbread cookies in small molds. This list could go on endlessly. At the same time, acquaintances only wondered how she manages to cook so much in a short time. Since Steve's large family lived in the suburbs, then, like everyone else in the region, took care of the garden plot, which grew everything you need: cucumbers, tomatoes, some potatoes, and different varieties of greens. Thanks to this, Megan and her little ones were provided with their produce almost the whole year. In the summer, it is fresh vegetables and fruits, and in the winter, already canned. What else could it be? Although Megan received an allowance for children, but the money was constantly short, and she could not count on buying fresh vegetables in the winter time. Still, no matter what you say, but out-of-season prices on them bite. So Megan had to preserve fruits and vegetables in advance. When you get a jar of plums and sweet syrup or apple juice in winter, nothing in the world can compare to such a delicious thing. Megan smiled at the thought of it, and after whipping up an omelet, she started frying it. At the same time, she prepared the batter for the pancakes according to her own special recipe. Probably every housewife has one simple, but very effective. Soon the house was filled with the divine smells of food cooking, making even Megan's stomach rumble. She smiled as she pictured the little ones, who always got up about 5 minutes before they finished cooking. What else could it be when their mother worked miracles in the kitchen? Christian was the first to wake up, slapping his bare feet on the floor. He came up from the back and hugged her. Megan smiled and asked quietly, "What are you doing up so early, son? You should have laid down a little longer. Finished your nap." "Oh no, Mom, I couldn't sleep when the beast in my stomach woke up. I was hungry," Christian objected. "Well, if that's the case, you'd better hurry up and wash up and get to the table. Today is your favorite omelet and pancakes." When he heard this, the boy jumped up and ran to the bathroom, where there was an old wash basin with water that had cooled down overnight and would cheer anyone up. 5 minutes later, Emily, Matthew, and Tom followed suit. Sneaking glances at the kids, Megan was once again surprised by their kindness toward each other. The little sister was not bypassed, led in front, waiting patiently for her to wash up. Real gentlemen. Good sons growing up. Too bad Steve can't see that, Megan thought sadly. No, her husband wasn't dead. It was something else entirely. 4 years ago, Steve had been involved in a case of embezzlement from a retailer's warehouse. Megan hadn't believed her husband could be a thief and had defended his innocence to the end. Sold the house downtown, moved to the suburbs, hired an expensive lawyer, monthly sent expensive parcels, and a lot of other things she did in small things, warm clothes, or a little money to solve the problems inside the prison. Steve himself held himself confidently and considered himself innocent. He said that everything happens in life, evidence planted by ill-wishers, which he crossed the road in the walls of the company. So they forged his signature on the documents on the shipment of an expensive batch of computers to the inconspicuous city, and that's where he, Steve, came in. They say, spend a little time in jail and at home. Figure out what's what. Maybe you'll wise up. Jesus, why did this have to happen to me? Haven't I been through enough? Megan thought sadly. She had good reason to think so. She grew up in a poor family, where her mother worked as a nanny in a kindergarten, her father a janitor. Besides Megan, there were 2 other kids in the family. It seems a little, but for the family budget is already a burden, and all would be nothing. But as soon as Megan was 7, she fell from a tree and broke her ankle. The ankle fused incorrectly, causing the girl to develop a limp. Doctors talked about surgery, but the times were such that Megan's parents could not make up their minds. It is difficult to say what exactly influenced their decision. Either they didn't have the money or they didn't wait for someone. But Megan's limp never went away. She had a particularly hard time at school. Being good-looking by nature, she had to endure the ridicule of her classmates, who invented offensive nicknames for her. Megan endured, trying to ignore the taunts of her classmates. When things got really bad, she would come home in tears and close herself in her room and cry quietly. What else could she do? In those days, the concept of bullying was not yet known, and it was a perennial and almost unsolvable problem. In any society, be it children or adults, there is always a place for the leader and the outcast. That's life. Over time, Megan got used to her limp and even learned to control it with the help of special pads in her shoes. Somehow she managed to keep her balance while walking, making her limp almost invisible. But as soon as she got nervous or lost her temper, the limp returned, causing serious discomfort. For example, Megan always remembered the scene from the prom when she almost fell off the stage during the awarding of diplomas. And even though she was wearing comfortable sneakers, and what would have happened if she had worn high-heeled shoes, there's nothing to say. The laughter of her classmates is forever etched in my memory. But everything could have turned out very differently if not for that unfortunate fall from the tree. What's the use of dredging up the past? It would be better to think about the present. After all, no matter how it is, and the children need to feed and clothe, and the house could use some repairs. Few people knew that Matthew, Tom, and Christian were actually adopted. No matter how many times Megan tried to get pregnant, the test never showed the coveted 2 stripes. And while Steve was very relaxed about it, no kids. Okay, maybe we'll get them later. And if not, we can't all be happy parents. For Megan, it was like a personal drama, painful and starting from the very bottom of her tortured soul. At one point, Megan was so desperate that she decided to take a baby from an orphanage. Steve just waved his hand. Well, if that's the way you want it, that's up to you, but just decide for yourself, please. Because I have so many worries at work that my head is spinning. The first visit to the baby house made a lasting impression on Megan. A woman's heart literally fluttered with tenderness to the little orphans. They're all so pretty, so beautiful. I could take them all at once. Studying the questionnaires prepared by the director of the orphanage, Megan involuntarily marveled at the vicissitudes of fate and its cruelty. One boy was left by his mother in the hospital, escaping through a window. The other was dropped off at the door of the orphanage in a basket. Reading these lines, Megan cried, trying to keep her tears from falling onto the dry, formal paper. Could these pages convey all the pain and tragedy of little orphans, whose lives were deprived of parental warmth and affection from the very beginning? But there were also such little children whose mom and dad did not abandon them, but left their lives by the will of an evil fate. Such was the case with Christian and Tom's parents. The Coltons, being almost 1-year-olds, lost their mom and dad when the oldest was 4 years old. For some inexplicable reason, Megan had immediately chosen this trio. Frankly, she was afraid that the children would be separated, since not every family could afford to take 3 children at once. And though the principal said he would never do such a thing, it was clear that he wasn't telling the truth. When Megan got home, the first thing she did was show her husband the pictures of the babies. Look how cute they are. And they're all brothers. Can you believe it? Steve wrinkled his nose in frustration. Why 3? We only agreed on 1. At this rate, I'll soon be sleeping at work. Couldn't you have picked another baby? Megan bit her lip painfully, trying desperately not to cry. But they're brothers. How am I going to keep them apart? They can't all be taken away together, you know. I understand. How can you not? But I don't print money, and I don't have a machine to make it either. I'm working my ass off, and you're getting your ass kicked. You've decided to become a mother of many children. Go ahead. I'm not stopping you. Tears spurted from Megan's eyes. Without another word, she went into the kitchen, where she cried until almost midnight. But how could she explain to Steve that her heart was literally bursting with tenderness for these babies? Was it her fault she couldn't have children? That night, Megan went to bed on the couch in the living room, unable to find the strength to be near her husband. Of course, she hadn't fallen out of love with Steve. That was out of the question. She just looked at the situation with a different set of eyes, realizing that her husband was indifferent to the children. So what? If that was the case, Megan would raise them on her own. And in the morning, Steve backed down. He came over to Megan, put his arm around her, and said quietly, "Do as you please. I'm not going to resist. Let there be these little ones. Helpers in the future I certainly do not prevent." Megan's eyes brimmed with tears. Was it really true? Or maybe she just heard it. But no. That morning, Steve sounded less like a joker and more serious. 3 weeks later, after collecting the necessary documents, Tom, Christian, and Matthew found themselves at Steve's house. Oh, how much happiness and joy was in the eyes of the little ones. They were tiny, but they understood everything, watching their parents with their little button eyes. Megan was literally soaring with happiness. At last her dream had come true. She had become a mom. What else do you need in life? A loving husband, children, and a home of your own. Sometimes for real, happiness needs so little that no millions cannot give the emotions that gives motherhood. With the arrival of children in the house, Steve began to change before his eyes. First, began to spend more time at work, and secondly, began to distance himself from the family, as if ashamed of his sons and wife. Megan was practically single-handedly engaged in the upbringing of the kids. Took the children to kindergarten, did not sleep at night when they were sick, and all the free time devoted to developmental games. Steve every day became more and more cold and indifferent to family life. No, from the outside he seemed to everyone an example of an ideal father, faithfully brought a paycheck, took care of the children and his wife. But in reality he behaved quite differently. How could he simply forget his wife's birthday or the date of their wedding? In fact, there was nothing wrong with it. It was just trifles. But it is from such trifles that further family life is built. And happy or not, it depends on the spouses themselves. A year flew by, during which Steve not only did not get used to the kids, but also began to treat them as strangers' children. Accustomed to this, Megan was no longer surprised when she learned that she was pregnant. At first she thought she was sick, and all her morning ailments were the result of some disease. But when she went to the doctor's office, she got the very happy news. "Congratulations on your 3rd week of pregnancy." Her heart almost jumped out of her chest with joy. Steve met the news of his wife's pregnancy with a grim expression on his face. He was having problems at work, so he saw the culprits in everyone who caught his eye. To be honest, though, the kids weren't to blame for his problems. On the contrary, Megan, as a mother of many children, received an allowance that helped everyone to live. Steve's failures were related to something else that his wife did not understand. A couple times Megan tried to find out what was wrong, but Steve only kept silent, preferring to watch TV with an absent look and drink beer, to which he was addicted since some time. Megan was never one for scandals. And why, in fact, why do it when the husband did not turn into an alcoholic, went to work, and sometimes even played with the children? True, he did it all through force, as if hoping to earn in the eyes of his wife some invisible points. During the entire period of pregnancy, Megan felt bad. Dizziness and nausea were particularly bothersome, but she did not complain because she knew that many women around the world experienced similar discomfort. After all, the main reward awaited Megan a little after, when she gave birth to a beautiful daughter, Emily. In a hurry to share this joyful news with the newly minted father, Megan repeatedly dialed her husband on the phone, but the indifferent voice of the cellular network operator informed her that the subscriber was out of range. Steve showed up only 3 days later, saying that he was on an urgent business trip where the connection was not bad. Probably if Megan had been more suspicious, she would have guessed right away that it was all a lie. After becoming a father of 4 children, Steve withdrew even more, being nervous and irritable. He flared up like a match for every occasion, especially when little Emily started whimpering at night because she had a tummy ache or was teething. "When are you all going to leave me alone? One is asking for the breast and the other is asking for the breast. Are you trying to turn me into a shameless donkey who can only raise your own and other people's children?" Steve resented. Megan only remained silent, trying to smooth over the awkward situation. She had long ago noticed that her husband was as duplicitous as anyone else. Recently, he'd said he wanted to be a father, and when they adopted babies, he cooled to them after just 2 weeks. Then he began to lie that he dreams of his own child, hinting that only then he will awaken kindred feelings. But as further events showed, all this was a lie and self-deception. Megan was respected by everyone in the neighborhood. Well aware of what she went to become a mother, the local authorities often tried to help, understanding how hard it is for her with 4 children. Megan herself did not ask for any benefits for herself and just enjoyed the family happiness, which gave her favorite children. Steve was on business trips more and more often, being away from home for a week or more. Megan felt that the denouement was close, but she could hardly imagine that everything would end in such a ridiculous way. When Steve was accused of fraud and imprisoned for 5 years, without the support of her husband, Megan kept her hands up, trying to provide for the children as best she could. The allowance wasn't the worst, but the money was melting away like snow in spring, and if, God forbid, one of the kids was sick, he was immediately followed by brothers and sisters. The children grew quickly, so Megan did not have time to buy them clothes. However, in some ways it was a little easier for her, because the younger ones could wear the clothes of the older ones from an early age. Megan taught her children to be thrifty not only in the way they handled things, but also in the way they treated food. She especially respected bread, knowing that it was the head of everything. And even if there was some stale bread left in the house, she would crumble it into small pieces and fill several feeders set up in the yard. The children loved to open the window and watch the birds frolic and peck at the bread treats with excitement. At such times, Megan felt as if the kids were watching some amazing movie that only they could understand. She liked living in the suburbs, quiet, calm, and also a vegetable garden at hand, where everything necessary grows. Naturally, the house she had sold to help Steve was much better in terms of amenities. Here we had to carry water from the well, the toilet was in the yard, and in winter it was necessary to heat the furnace with wood or coal. But Megan didn't complain. She prepared for winter in advance. She gathered kindling, and when she could save some money, she bought several cubes of firewood or a couple of tons of coal. Most of the time it was not enough for the winter, because one time does not come to another, and winters, as we know, are different. Megan's part-time job was that since some time she had mastered the skill of manicure, for her services took a little, because she did not consider herself a recognized master. But those of her clients who had ever come to her invariably returned again, and they did so not because of the low fee, but because Megan was not only a good master, but also a pleasant conversationalist, and she never complained, never shared her problems, never put them on her clients. Most often they came to her home. And of course, she did not earn a lot of money in any way. On the other hand, as her father liked to say, the field hand pecking at the grain. Many considered Megan a widow, thinking that her husband died. But that wasn't really the case, because she faithfully sent Steve parcels, sincerely surprised that he never once during all this time did not offer her to come on a date. It was possible to understand his motives if you wanted to, and he was taking care of the kids who would be without their mom for a few days. On the other hand, Megan would have been able to find someone else for that time or hire a nanny from the cheap ones. Steve, on the other hand, preferred to serve his time alone, denied his family altogether. He only wrote letters when he needed money. For some inexplicable reason, Steve asked for it more and more often. He needed to pay off a gambling debt, or he needed to pay for a good place in an industrial zone. Megan was not well versed in all these prison nuances and considered her husband a hostage of circumstances. Those who knew about the situation were always surprised that her husband did not apply for parole. After all, with his reputation and lack of a criminal record, Steve should have been released in 2 or 3 years, and he's already in his 4th year. It's weird, he's not a murderer, but he's only accused of fraud, they said. Megan just shrugged her shoulders and turned the conversation in another direction. She didn't want to condemn her husband, and she didn't like to criticize people behind their backs. When Steve returned from the colony, he would tell her what was wrong. Thoughts of the past were so engrossing that Megan didn't realize her hand was frozen in mid-air with the cup of tea before it reached her mouth. "Mom, what are you doing?" Christian asked anxiously. Today was his day in the kitchen, and the boy was heartily excited to be able to eat his favorite omelet, along with the bonus of delicious chocolate chip cookies. "It's nothing, son. I was just thinking." Megan waved it off. Christian paused for a moment, chewing diligently on the soft pancakes. Then he asked, "Mom, why don't we have chickens? Then we'd have our own eggs, and we can go to the store less often, and I can take care of them myself. Or Tom and me together. We can have a whole flock of them, and we can feed them grass and change their water." Megan smiled. Good soul. To get chickens, you'd have to build a house first, and they don't just eat grass. They need feed too. Grain, corn should be present. Then they will lay better, and you can't get far on grass alone. Christian became visibly sad. The boy liked omelets so much that he was ready to eat them every day. Since her son had unwittingly reminded her of groceries, Megan decided to head to the store. Her first customer wouldn't be arriving until noon today, which meant she would have time to run out and be back in time for him. Megan got up from the table and, kissing each of the children in turn, added, "I'm going to the store now. Well, I'll be gone for an hour and a half. Why don't you sit and watch cartoons for a while, and I'll be back in a jiffy. We won't go to kindergarten today." "The teacher called half an hour ago," said. "There is repair work on the roof. Something's wrong. Either it's leaking or the wind has damaged it. Anyway, we're on home away from home today." "Wow, so we can play hide and seek as long as we want," exclaimed little Amelie. The drumming of her feet on the table like a little drummer made Megan smile. Okay. You'd think you didn't like kindergarten that much." She started to get ready to go to the store. Megan usually went to the same place, where she was well known and sometimes even loaned groceries. But today she had money, so she could take what she wanted without hesitation. However, Megan didn't take much: a carton of milk, a tray of eggs, a loaf of bread, and a few other things that no housewife could do without in the kitchen. There weren't many people around at this time. Megan didn't like rush hour when the checkout line was jammed. Now she could walk the aisles and choose what she wanted. Most often she bought goods with red price tags, not the least bit embarrassed about it. "When I get rich, then I'll buy something better. But now it doesn't make any difference. The products are good anyway," Nayeli convinced herself. Entering the store, Megan looked at the guard and realized she didn't know him. Apparently, a new shift had come in, which was confirmed a little later when Megan saw the clerks at the register. Regardless, Nayeli still said hello to everyone and took her basket and headed toward one of the rows. Looking at the price tags, she mentally imagined what she could make with all the food. An old, "Look, I need to get the security guard to look at the security cameras. You know what I mean? I just got robbed here," Megan pleaded. The female cashier shook her head reproachfully. "Here we go. My purse was stolen. I'm not paying. I'm calling for justice. What are we supposed to do now? Make amends? And measure out the groceries for the inconvenience? No, sweetheart. Why don't you get out of here? You don't want to pay, and the guard has nothing better to do than deal with your videos." Megan's lips trembled. "You have to understand, this could happen again. You know, that bastard could rob someone else. Why are you talking to me like that? I have 4 children who will go hungry because of this crook." The cashier's cheeks reddened, angrily becoming like a tomato. "Don't you dangle your kids in my face. You've done well for yourself. First they give birth, and then they go around begging for benefits, and they tell everyone how to live their lives. If you can't support your kids, you shouldn't have had them. I'm not a social security fund, and I'm not going to help you. So get out of here." Megan felt like she was in an unreal world where everything was not as it should be, and that cashier and the guard with the absent and indifferent look standing off to the side, did they really not care at all about her misfortune? At that moment, someone touched Megan's shoulder with a hand. "Allow me, please." She turned around sharply and saw a thin man in his mid-30s standing in front of her, watching with obvious interest. The cashier shifted her gaze to the stranger and smiled. "Well, there's another defender. You must be in a conspiracy to fool me. You're going to start singing at the top of your lungs that your wallet was stolen from your pocket, and while you're at it, you'll steal something. I know your tricks. I watch crime shows every day. I can tell. You have a talent for this kind of investigation," the man said ironically. Megan chuckled, unable to hold back a chuckle. The cashier's cheeks grew even redder with embarrassment. "Don't laugh at me, my dear. You better think about where you'll get the money to pay for the purchase. You're having fun. I'm being nice to her, and she's making a circus of me. But why a circus? I don't see any circus here. Moreover, I think that a crime has been committed here, objected the stranger who had entered the conversation. What crime? What are you talking about? What are you worried about? The store was practically empty. Well, when there is a crowd or pre-holiday frenzy, then it's easy to steal a purse. You can't tell. But now it's just lies. The cashier flared up. The man smiled. Now I think we should look at the security cameras. Who are you, anyway, to be in charge here? The woman was indignant again. I'm Andrew, the stranger replied calmly. Megan stood silently, unable to take her eyes off the kind and determined stranger. The cashier grinned. Your name doesn't mean anything to me, Andrew, so get the hell out of here before I really call security. But he was clearly not going to back down. I admit my name doesn't mean anything to you, but to your owner, Anatoly Smirnov, it will obviously say a lot, because it was my money that opened this store. The cashier turned pale. Only now she realized that this strange man knows too much to be an ordinary customer. I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't know. Please don't say anything to Anatoly Sergeyevich, the cashier begged. Andrew smiled. Relax. I'm not a despot. But only the sect fee cameras need to be looked at. I'm sure this customer was robbed, while the security guard and I are going to sort it out, run this girl's purchases. I'll pay, replied the businessman. The cashier was eager to fulfill the request. Megan stood there, still unable to believe her ears. Just 5 minutes ago she had wanted to cry and be hysterical from the feeling of hopelessness. Now it was like some kind of dream. As it turned out, Andrew was right. Megan had indeed been robbed by a pickpocket who had distracted her attention with a shove in the back. And at that moment, with his other free hand, he pulled out the wallet. He's so clever. I didn't even feel a thing, Megan explained with an embarrassed smile. Andrew nodded in agreement, and then gave the necessary order to the guard to print out a sketch of the thief and hang it at the entrance to the store. The businessman then took Megan's bag of groceries and headed for the exit. Oh, that's okay. I can handle it myself. Also, give me your information so I can pay you back. It's almost 2,000, Megan said quietly. But Andrew didn't want to hear anything. It wasn't until they were outside that Megan noticed Andrew's unnaturally pale skin and the sadness in his eyes, which at first she mistook for seriousness. He walked nonchalantly to his car. The businessman said, Well, come on, tell me, where do you live? I'll give you a ride. Megan's first thought was to refuse. It was awkward. And the neighbors might think the wrong thing. They'd say the wife's having fun while the husband's in jail. But then, looking at the sad eyes of her savior, she realized that she could not refuse him anything. Okay, I'm not far away from here. Andrew drove the car confidently, occasionally asking questions to keep the conversation going. He said little about himself, from which Megan concluded that he was a rather secretive person. Megan felt a kindred spirit in him from the first minutes of communication, telling everything without secrecy, and why, in principle, to be embarrassed if all this is the truth. 4 children, 3 of them adopted, a bad husband who got into the colony by misunderstanding, and a single mother with very dim prospects for the future. Andrew listened in silence. As the expression on his face changed, Megan realized. Her story resonated with the businessman's soul, although perhaps she was wrong, and Andrew was simply a skillful actor, able to control internal and external emotions. Life is not spoiling you, that's for sure, but don't despair. I think I can help you, summarized the businessman. You don't have to worry. You've been so helpful. I feel like I owe you. But don't worry, I'll pay you back, Megan said. But Andrew waved his hands in the air. Oh, really? No talk of debts, and I do not want to hear. I'm not poor enough to take money from a mother of many children. Megan smiled and looked at him with different eyes. He's a good man. That Andrew, she thought. Just like that, he'd come over and protected her from the brazen cashier and the security guard, for whom customers meant nothing. It was about a kilometer to the house when Andrew suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and, clutching his chest with his hand, coughed painfully. "What's wrong with you?" "Are you sick?" Megan exclaimed anxiously. Andrew did not answer anything. Pressing a handkerchief to his lips to calm the agonizing attack, he spent about 5 minutes, after which he breathed more evenly again. "I'm sorry, please, it's my illness. It'll pass now," he answered the passenger's question. They found oncology. In general, things are not good, I tell you, but I'm not giving up." Megan looked at Andrew with pity, and he immediately felt the warmth of her eyes. In turn, she felt that this wise and confident businessman is really alone in his trouble, cannot share it with anyone but himself. "But what about treatment? Medications, surgeries, Megan grasped at straws like a drowning man. Andrew sighed sadly. "Surgery. But how can I put it more correctly? The probability of a favorable outcome is extremely low. Thank the doctors, told me about it honestly, without secrecy. Some say I have 6 months to live. Others say I can easily last 5 years or more. According to the experts, surgery can either fix your health problems or make them worse than they need to be." Megan shook her head uncertainly. "No, I think you need treatment. Why rely on luck? Especially, if you'll forgive me, do you have the means to do so?" Andrew was about to say something else, but Megan's house appeared ahead, and the businessman hesitated half a word. She sensed it, but didn't continue the awkward conversation. Instead, with a smile, she invited Andrew to tea. "No, Megan, thank you. But it's a little awkward, and the children again, that's what they'll think. They'll say, 'Some dying uncle came.'" But Megan always knew how to be persuasive, and soon Andrew had no choice but to follow her invitation. But before he went in, Andrew asked her to address him as you. "I feel like a grandfather." "No, I realize I look a little older, but we're actually the same age." Megan agreed, nodded, and opened the door. "Wow, that's great. You got back so fast. We didn't even have time to miss you," Christian exclaimed, and was surprised to see an unfamiliar man in the hallway. "I'd like you to meet Uncle Andrew. He helped me at the store when," Megan began, but the guest gently touched her arm, letting her know that the children didn't need to know what had happened. Soon they were all sitting at the communal table drinking tea. Andrew smiled faintly as he listened to the cheerful chatter, furtively glancing at the children. Megan was willing to bet anything that he didn't have children of his own. It was probably the same look she herself had gotten when she thought she was infertile. Soon Andrew became visibly animated and began to behave more relaxed, telling the children funny stories from his life. The only thing that made Megan uncomfortable was the unnatural pallor and thinness of the guest, which made his lips seem bloodless. Instead of the supposed 20 minutes, Andrew spent at least 3 hours at Megan's house, and he enjoyed playing with the boys so much that he even forgot about his illness and stopped coughing, putting his handkerchief in his pocket. Andrew probably would have stayed even longer, but that's when Megan had a client come in for a manicure. He had to politely say goodbye and leave. After giving him a look, Megan smiled. There was something special about Andrew, as if a ray of light had broken through the clouds and was now caressing her cheeks. There was an inner strength emanating from the businessman that had nothing to do with his sickly appearance. This is what happens when the thin and infirm have the strongest inner core, capable of rolling mountains and turning back rivers. Returning home, Andrew thought only of Megan. His heart fluttered with happiness when he remembered the children joyfully jumping around him like a round dance on New Year's Eve. Andrew deliberately tried not to think about the fact that his lawful wife left him 3 months ago, when she learned of her husband's serious illness. However, Liam before was not distinguished by special tenderness and treated him no better than an ATM that gives out money at the first request. Andrew realized that he made a mistake, tying his life with such a windy and fickle girl. On the other hand, and who among us does not make mistakes, especially being enchanted by the spectacular appearance of his chosen one? But the worst was not even the fact of betrayal, but the fact that, leaving to another, Leah asked to make a will in her favor. Andrew's parents died many years ago, and therefore he had no one closer to Leah. They never had time to give birth to children. Although Andrew himself very much wanted to become the father of a boy or a girl, no difference. There would be a little man, and then bring up, where can we go? But in the mind of Leah was only money and nothing more. And also restaurants, beauty salons, and expensive stores, where she was ready to buy everything you need and do not need. Andrew for a long time did not believe that Leah had a lover. And only when Nellie defiantly left to another, he realized the separation had nothing to do with his illness. It had started much earlier. Feeling too much freedom, Leah began to behave as she pleased. And after all, Andrew's deputy for the company has repeatedly hinted at his wife's infidelity. But the businessman only waved away, refused to believe in the obvious. Most likely, Andrew's illness simply untied his wife's hands, making it clear that very soon Nellie will be a rich widow heiress. But in order for happiness to fall into the hands of the beauty, the businessman had to make a will, according to which all his assets would pass into the possession of his wife. Fortunately, to make such a serious step, Andrew was not in a hurry, still hoping for the support of Leah on the issue of the operation. His wife, instead of help, began to talk nonsense that in case of death, Andrew will arrange with the cemetery manager and find her husband the best place for burial. All this sounded so disgusting that Andrew once again realized that he had made a very serious mistake. But the meeting with Megan stirred in his soul such feelings that all this time remained untouched, like ancient relics. Back in the empty house, Andrew turned on the TV and lay down on the couch. He didn't feel like eating. In fact, there was no appetite either. Listening half-voiced to the afternoon newscast, the businessman plunged into painful reflection. Thoughts and images swirled in his head, competing with each other in ingenuity to get his master to pay attention to them. Suddenly, one of them was far stronger and more confident than all the others. To Andrew's amazement, the thought had nothing to do with thinking about Leah, and it was primarily about his new acquaintance. A mysterious gleam immediately appeared in Andrew's eyes. What if we make a will for Megan? True, not to talk about it immediately and voice it later, when everything becomes clear. And also offer to let her stay with me for a while. How long do I have left? 2 weeks? How about a month? Yes, I'll ask for a month. I can't live any longer than that anyway, the businessman whispered. No, and he wasn't even thinking about anything bad. In truth, Andrew just wanted to finally experience a little family happiness. Just a little, albeit fictitious, albeit not real, but still happiness. That could not give him neither money, nor power, nor position in society. The longer Andrew thought about it, the more he liked the idea. The businessman was not afraid to make a mistake, because he knew that he would never meet a woman worse than Leah, of course. There was no question of any mutual love for Megan being a hardened realist. He realized that she had a husband who would sooner or later get out of prison and present his claims to her. In Andrew's own opinion, his plan looked foolish and naive, to say the least. He wanted to play out a fairy tale scene for himself in which Megan would become his queen, his wife for a month with an extremely platonic form of relationship. But then, when Andrew crossed the line and went to the other world, it would turn into a pumpkin again, and the carriage would turn to a rat and disappear into the nearest back alley. Megan frowned. The events of the last few hours had kept her awake, stirring her mind with the thought that she was doing the wrong thing. After all, her legal husband Steve was now in jail and very much in need of help. As a reward, Andrew will leave Megan a will drawn up in her favor. And this, by the way, a good amount of money in the bank accounts, a house and real estate in the city and region. All in all, a lot of other attractive things. But we'll talk about that later. Let her find out about it after his departure, when Andrew will not be. Everything is fair. Just 1 month, just 1 month. Deciding not to procrastinate, Andrew went to her that very evening, although at first he intended to wait until morning and only then to announce his request. On the other hand, having imagined a sleepless night caused by anxiety about the upcoming conversation, the businessman decided to say everything at once. When Megan heard his proposal, she barely restrained a surprised exclamation. For a month? But what will it look like for everyone else? Andrew, I'm sorry, but I'm married. What if Steve finds out? People will see it and judge me. It's not nice. Andrew, eyes downcast with embarrassment, replied, I understand, Megan, you do not think I will not allow anything indecent. I just want to live with you. Like this, with the illusion of a family and the feeling that I'm needed to keep the kids close and take them to the park, to the rides, to the pond, where the swans swim, you know? I don't have much time left. I don't believe in these surgeries. Tears spurted from Megan's eyes. The businessman's voice trembled, and she felt that the guest was telling the truth. Andrew's story touched her to the core. And also never before had she met such a sensitive man who, having wealth and power, dreamed of quite ordinary family things. But she would not abandon him and would help as much as before, and maybe a lot more. When the children found out that they were moving into Uncle Andrew's house, their joy knew no bounds. Well, while we're gonna live in a real mansion, with a bathtub and a jacuzzi and a trampoline you can jump on until the wee hours of the morning, asked little Christian. Andrew smiled. We could, of course. What are you talking about? And in the pool, is the water warm or cold? Because I'm not going in cold, Matthew asked cautiously. It's warm. Don't worry. We'll make it as warm as we need it to be, the businessman explained. And Megan's house was filled with the friendly cries of the children. Half an hour later, having taken the necessary things with them, they sat in Andrew's sub and drove towards a new life. Only Megan knew the truth, and she remembered perfectly well that they would spend no more than a month at the businessman's house. That was their unspoken agreement. Maybe it was all just madness or a moment of weakness, but now she wanted to be weak, and she was so tired of carrying everything she had, her children, her house, her job, and a husband who demanded more and more money. No, Megan didn't blame Steve. Things happen in prison, and God forbid anyone should be in prison. As the children and Megan crossed the threshold of the house, they felt an unparalleled joy and delight. It seemed as if they were in a fairy tale, where their every wish would be fulfilled at the wave of a magic wand. Perhaps it would have been so if the wizard in the person of the owner of the house was not so painful. Megan sensed that Andrew was mentally burying himself and was trying hard to cling to this island of pleasant experiences that he would take with him to the next world. Trying to distract him from his sad thoughts, Megan talked to him a lot, telling him stories from her past. She was so emotional that she even told Andrew that as a child she had been able to overcome her limp. What, just like that? And disappeared? Surprised asked Andrew. Yes, no, not disappeared. Just skillfully disguised. Special shoes I wear. And a certain group of muscles developed so that not so conspicuous. Andrew looked at the guest with respect. He liked Megan more and more, especially after she entered the kitchen and started cooking. Eager to try out all the gadgets and appliances that stood there, Megan said that this place was a paradise for those who liked to cook deliciously and a lot. Andrew watched with a smile as she tended to the kitchen, fiddling with flour and frying something on the new stove. In turn, the children explored room after room like little detectives from the cartoon of the same name. One morning, Megan even caught herself thinking that she did not want to return to her old life, which could seem both boring and devoid of colors. But Andrew did not even allow himself to think that soon he would be alone again. A week flew by, then another. Not a day passed that Megan's children did not enjoy something new, which abounded in the life of a wealthy businessman. During this time, Andrew, as planned, went to a notary and made a will, except that instead of Leah, it was Megan's heirs who were specified in it. The notary did not ask unnecessary questions and treated the last will of the businessman with understanding. Andrew was rapidly losing weight, and even outsiders could see that he had not long to live. Feeling anxious about this, Megan strongly asked him to agree to the operation, but Andrew only shook his head negatively. No, what's surgery for me? When our contract is over, then I will think about it. Now is not the time. As you might expect, Megan knew nothing about the fact that Andrew had reasoned in his own way and made a will in her favor. And how could she have suspected such a thing when it seemed unthinkable to all normal people who did not know about it in Leah, waiting from day to day the departure of the spouse in the next world? They filed for divorce, as they should. But the girl herself felt that, most likely, Andrew will leave before the divorce process, which means that all assets sooner or later will go to her. Leah's new lover turned out to be cunning and far-sighted. He immediately saw the possible benefits of connection with this beauty. He himself told very little about himself and preferred to keep silent, tactfully avoiding answers. Andrew looked longingly at the calendar, where the date of the end of their contract with Megan was marked with a circle. Naturally, the businessman did not even talk about any extension. Knowing perfectly well that he could not compromise the married woman any further, she had done much more for him than seemed possible in this situation. To Megan's own surprise, she really enjoyed being in wife status for a month. No, there was nothing of the sort. No kissing, no hugging, no talking about romantic topics. Andrew, as promised, behaved decently and did not make any hints about the possible development of relations. Just enjoyed her company and the company of the children, whose life finally entered prosperity. Unfortunately, when the contract was only a week away from completion, Andrew was hospitalized. Another bout of painful coughing that had occurred during the night had Megan very worried. She had called an ambulance against the owner's request. Only now she realized what Andrew was waiting for so persistently. The businessman wanted to enjoy life with her to the fullest and then go to the next world, being a happy family man. Even if their marriage was unofficial and only for a month, what difference does it make? In such cases, only the latter comes to mind, doesn't it? That night, when Andrew went to the hospital, the doctors did the impossible, and at the cost of incredible efforts were able to bring him back from the other side of the world. But his situation was still critical. That's why it was decided to do the operation, no matter what. It was the case when procrastination is like death. Megan understood it like no one else. Despite the fact that she was not Andrew's legal spouse, she made sure that he did not feel abandoned and deprived of family care and affection, visiting him every day in the ward. She tuned Andrew to a favorable outcome of the case and asked him not to think about bad things. Unnoticeably for himself, he became lively and even began to smile. And then Leah appeared in the room, but she came not alone, but together with her new lover, who at the sight of Andrew visibly embarrassed and modestly stepped aside. Megan had her back to the exit and didn't immediately realize who had entered. But as soon as she turned around, she almost lost her senses at what she saw. In front of her stood a spectacular blonde woman of about 35. On her right hand stood her ex-husband, Steve, the same husband who was supposed to be in jail right now. "Steve, it's you. How did you get here?" Megan exclaimed. Steve slowly backed away. Tina walked down the street and could not believe her happiness. She, a simple girl from a small town, was able to realize her dream and enter a prestigious construction university. Even as a child, she loved to play with a toy builder's kit, which she found under the Christmas tree. From morning till evening, the little girl never took off her bright yellow helmet and never parted with the plastic tools, imagining herself a great builder worthy of her parents. And what do you want? After all, your whole family is like that, numerous acquaintances and relatives of the large and friendly family declared in a voice. Tina's father, Stephen, was a famous sculptor. The girl's mother, Hilary, was also directly related to construction and architecture. For many years, she worked at the Department of Landscape Architecture. Genes, multiplied by the intelligence and talent of a young girl, did their job. And now Tina, incredibly proud and satisfied with high exam scores, at all pairs flew home to her favorite Aunt Shelley, who kindly let the 18-year-old student live. The old woman's apartment was not far from the university where her beloved niece was enrolled. Her windows overlooked the busy square, which had first amazed Tina with its scale. When Tina came to the capital, about which she had heard so much, she found it alien and inhospitable. This opinion was formed in the first days of living in a city with a population of many millions. However, Shelley quickly helped the inexperienced girl to settle in. For hours on end, they walked along the main streets in bohemian neighborhoods. Auntie, a native resident, enjoyed sharing memories of the bygone days when she was as young and beautiful as Tina herself. After these walks, the girl finally and irrevocably fell in love with the wide avenues and narrow streets that beckoned and attracted the eyes of tourists, as if promising to open the veil of mystery. One such evening, just before Christmas, Shelley insisted that Tina wear her best outfit and get her hair done. The lights. The dusty roses wonderfully accentuated young Tina's exquisite beauty. Aunt Shelley personally took care of her niece's hair, styling the blonde locks that went all the way down to her waist into an elaborate style. After a while, the old silver-rimmed mirror reflected a young beauty who looked at the world with wide-open eyes. "Auntie, is it really me?" Tina marveled. twirling in front of the mirror and enjoying the subtle scent of floral perfume. Her cheeks flushed brightly in anticipation of a real Christmas miracle. She felt like Cinderella preparing for her first ever royal ball. Tina ran her hand down her slender neck, touching for a moment the strand of pink pearls her aunt had given her for her 18th birthday. "Of course you are, sweetheart. Unfortunately, nowadays young people do not try to emphasize their own individual beauty. All girls look like sisters. The same lips, eyelashes, hair, eyebrows," said the woman, tinting her lips with bright lipstick. Her velvet evening dress of a noble wine color emphasized her aristocratic features. Despite her advanced age, Shelley was still a good-looking woman who always drew attention to herself. "You look marvelous tonight, and you're sure to outshine a lot of women," Tina said sincerely, admiring the stately figure of the majestic woman. "And that ruby brooch makes you look like a queen. Where did you get it?" Tina touched the tulip-shaped brooch, topped with a crown of tiny rubies and diamonds that shimmered like dewdrops. "Thank you for the compliment. How can I compete with you?" "With your youth and freshness," Shelley replied. "Always be a sweet, kind, humble girl. Those virtues have always been valued by men. And now, sweetheart, it's time for us to go out because you don't want to be late for the theater." "Auntie, but you didn't say where you got that brooch," Tina repeated, throwing her coat back on her shoulders. "It was given to me by my late husband on my wedding day. He always compared me to a flower. And tulips were his favorite flowers," Shelley continued. "Their shy and delicate buds delighted me throughout our married life. On every holiday I received a bouquet of tulips tied with a scarlet ribbon to symbolize our love. Fortunately, my husband did not spoil me with attention and gifts, but it is this gift that is dear to my heart. Auntie, I wish I could love someone with the same sincere and fiery love." Tina sighed. "You've got a long way to go, my dear," Shelley said, flirtatiously fixing her hair. "You're too young to realize the beauty of first meetings, shy glances, and tender touches. Now let's hurry, or all our efforts will be wasted. It's not for nothing that we took so long to get dressed up." Tina nodded in response and let the older woman take her arm and head for the exit. The thought of a happy marriage never entered her pretty head. And what girl wouldn't dream of a long-awaited meeting with her beloved that would turn her world upside down? Thinking about all this, Tina answered her aunt's questions absent-mindedly and looked at the shining streets of New York, bathed in thousands of twinkling garlands. Despite the traffic jams, they arrived at the Metropolitan Opera House on time, and even had time to admire the spacious lobby of the theater, its luxury and solemnity. In the very center of the lobby stood a tall pine tree, surrounded by gifts wrapped in gilded paper. Tina was particularly impressed by the antique toys that magically attracted attention. Pewter soldiers in brightly colored uniforms were absolutely enchanted by beautiful ballerinas frozen in a jump. Their open-work lace skirts, decorated with feathers and rhinestones, swayed from side to side, as if their owners were alive. Taking a seat in the box next to Shelley, Tina was out of reality for a few hours. The ballet nutcracker completely captured her, subdued her, and carried her into unknown distances. Together with the brave little Marie, she spun around the ornately decorated Christmas tree, fought hordes of rats, walked with the prince, the nutcracker's bow, through the fairy tale forest in anticipation of the holiday. When the action was over, Tina found her cheeks wet with tears and her chest heaving with joy and happiness from the fairy tale production. Having visited the theater only once in her life, Tina had fallen in love with it forever. Returning home, the happy but tired women immediately headed to their bedrooms. After changing into cozy pajamas, Tina took off her makeup and untangled her curls in preparation for sleep. That night, Tina had wonderful, magical dreams in which she was surrounded by the care and love of a tall, dark-haired man whose face she could not see. No matter how hard she tried, his voice so dear and sweet to her heart, repeating over and over again the words of love, caused her to feel the same way. but a sudden black whirlwind shattered the idyll of the happy fairy tale. To her horror, Tina discovered that it was not a young man, but the Mouse King himself who was clutching her in his arms. His clawed paws, covered with short black hair, left marks on her shoulders. In fear, the girl looked into his scarlet eyes, dimly shimmering on his sinister face, proud ears with protruding stubble and short but sharp fangs. "You are mine now, mine forever," the Mouse King shouted gloatingly as he put the crown on her and watched her turn into a rat. With difficulty, Tina managed to escape from the embrace of her nightmare. Wet with sweat and tangled hair, she terrified Aunt Shelley, who was awakened in the middle of the night by her screams. "Honey, did you have a bad dream? Don't feel bad, it happens. It's just a dream. Soon the morning will come and your fears will go away," like smoke. Shelley comforted her crying niece. Her affectionate hands clasped the girl to her, and she never stopped stroking Tina's hair. I saw him, and I'll never forget his ratty look," the girl said and burst into tears. "But worst of all, he put a crown on me, and I turned into a disgusting rat, just like him." "Tina, but that's impossible. You realize that wearing a crown doesn't make you a nice, pretty girl. You're just very impressionable. Did the ballet we saw the night before stick in your memory?" "Yes. Oh, honey, please don't cry. You don't want to upset your Aunt Shelley, do you? After all, I was the one who initiated this unfortunate trip." "Okay, Auntie, you must be right. It's just that my dream was so vivid and memorable that I completely lost my head," Tina agreed. Shelley didn't seem to mind, but she was alarmed by her niece's dream that she'd had on Christmas Eve. Dreams that occurred on Christmas Eve usually spoke of global changes and warned of danger. The woman began to believe in dreams after the death of her husband, whom she loved more than life. A week before the tragedy, she saw herself in a cemetery with a bouquet of tulips, the flowers that her husband so idolized. She silently placed them on a fresh grave and wandered along the road. A few days later, a heart attack took from Shelley the man in whom she saw the meaning of her life. Had it not been for the children, who surrounded their mother with affection and care, it is likely that the old woman would have followed her husband, unable to bear the bitter separation. The recollection of bygone days aroused in her breast a long-forgotten bitterness. No, her wound wasn't fresh, but her soul was still sore, covered with crosses and scars. Shelley tried hard to live and rejoice in each new day allotted to her, so as not to upset in any way her spouse who watched over her from heaven. And now, hugging her niece tightly, she rejoiced that fate had been gracious to her and had given her the opportunity to care for her kinsman. "Auntie, why are you crying?" The girl marveled and remembered her late husband, Robin. He also comforted me, hugged me, and said kind words when I woke up from terrible nightmares. Tina was amazed at her aunt's candor, who rarely mentioned her late husband's name, but kept silent, trying not to open wounds that were fresher than she had thought. The girl hugged the woman tightly and whispered words of gratitude. They never slept that night and went to the kitchen to drink fragrant tea and have a heart-to-heart talk, looking out the window as the wind carried the snowflakes to the windows of high-rise buildings, carefully covering the city with a downy blanket. So day by day, in the hustle and bustle and daily routine, the winter passed, and the beautiful spring came. Spring generously gave everyone its warmth. The first flowers were blooming everywhere, and the trees were quietly shining with young tender leaves. Together with spring, Tina's life changed a lot. Participating in a university beauty contest, the girl took first place, impressing all the judges with her natural beauty and charm. Next to the other girls, she was like a breath of fresh mountain air in the middle of a smog-covered city. One of the invited guests was absolutely enchanted by the young beauty and even offered Tina a contract with the Angel modeling agency. His wife, Catherine, after whom the agency was named, a formerly successful model, seeing Tina, immediately predicted a great future for her. Despite the fear of her parents, who did not want their only daughter to drop out of university, Tina took a leave of absence and took training courses for models. A month later, the girl plunged headfirst into a luxurious modeling life. From morning until the evening, she participated in shows, showing others only the most exquisite and refined clothes. Aunt Shelley supported her niece in everything, accompanying the girl at fashion shows and photo shoots, sincerely rejoicing at her success. At one of these shows, which opened Tina, something absolutely extraordinary happened, which turned the girl's life forever. Thanks to the efforts of decorators and designers, the country house of an influential businessman turned into a real savannah. When the light went out in the hall, and there was only the illumination of the mirrored podium, everyone took their seats in the auditorium and prepared for the show. Light ethnic music started playing, and the hostess in a bright yellow dress, which made her look like an exotic flower, came to the microphone and made a welcoming speech. Opening the show was a young diva named Tina, the talented discovery of Angel Modeling House. Slender beauty in a colorful airy dress and a painted scarf tied on her head like a turban, with the grace of a panther before the jump came to the podium flooded with dazzling light of spotlights. Her movements were polished and precise, smoothly walking on high heels with high lacing, now and then exposing her slender legs in the bold slits of her dress. She strode to the end of the podium like a goddess. After a quick glance around the audience, the girl deftly flapped her long silk sleeves, more like giant wings. Proudly, she turned around and disappeared backstage. Her back shone from the myriad of sequins applied to her body. The guests of the show, both men and women, were absolutely mesmerized by the young diva with snow-white skin and turquoise-colored eyes. That evening, dozens of luxurious outfits with humorous prints, fringe, bright colors, and unusual patterns were demonstrated. Large jewelry and extraordinary dresses, blouses, skirts, pants, sundresses, and overalls attracted the attention of the city's fashionistas, who closely followed the performance. Each of them was ready to part with a tidy sum of money just to become a happy owner of fashionable clothes. But the stronger half of humanity was more attracted by long-legged beauties, blondes, brunettes, shades, and redheads. Representatives of the modeling business charmed many. Married men could afford only occasionally glance at the girls, giving more time to their companions. But bachelors came to the show with only one purpose: to choose a worthy spouse, who will look spectacular against the background of her husband and will be able to support small talk. At least a dozen models were invited, but only Tina's name was on everyone's lips. All the other girls, many of whom were world-famous models with rich experience, paled in comparison to the young wonder. Designers quarreled among themselves, wishing that the clothes under their brand advertised only Tina. And modeling agencies offered the girl huge sums of money and the most favorable conditions, hoping for fruitful cooperation. However, Tina was faithful to her choice. She firmly decided to stay in the modeling house, which discovered her talent and did so much good for her. And its owner, the talented and energetic Catherine, had long been Tina's best friend with whom she could discuss anything. After the luxurious show, there was no less luxurious buffet. Champagne was flowing. Exotic fruits and light appetizers were simply amazing. Live music sounded from everywhere, creating a special mood when you want to dance all night long, despite the fatigue. Tina, dressed in a gold jumpsuit with a deep neckline and pants, looked simply dazzling that night. Her long blonde hair was slicked back and gathered into a high ponytail. A minimum of makeup on her face only emphasized her natural beauty and young age. Ignoring the champagne, the girl allowed herself only a little fruit, remembering that even a perfect figure should be watched and kept in tone. However, she so sometimes wanted to relax and allow herself something delicious. Tina especially missed her mother's apple pies with cinnamon. At first, this magical aroma followed the girl from everywhere, and even a sip of celery smoothie was like a native taste from her childhood. Now her menu was dominated by fruits and vegetables, eggs, avocado, and fish. But she had to forget about fast food, carbonated drinks, and baked goods. But what won't you do for a successful career? Thanks to her strong character and endurance, the girl was able to quickly adapt to the new regime of the day, regular training and proper nutrition. Sometimes she still allowed herself a little dark chocolate or ice cream with salted caramel, which she simply adored. However, having allowed herself small weaknesses, Tina always returned to her former life, perfectly realizing that the right lifestyle is the key to health, vigor, and longevity. Success and universal recognition came to her overnight, but could also evaporate if she didn't put so much effort into it. In just a few months, she was able to pay for her parents to take a trip to Hawaii that they had dreamed of not too long ago, but had always put off for the sake of buying a TV, couch, or a refrigerator. And to her aunt, she gave a diamond bracelet. Knowing well her love for jewelry, Tina signed up for English courses, realizing that soon she would have to travel all over the world, and a knowledge of foreign languages has never hurt anyone. Despite a rather busy schedule and constant employment, the girl was insanely happy. After all, she had such a chance to communicate with people, make acquaintances, learn new things, wear high-quality clothes, and in the future even travel the world. At the same time, Tina did not become conceited. She was still the same simple, sweet, and compassionate girl. She donated part of her royalties to an orphanage and a shelter for homeless animals. The thought that she could now help those in need warmed her. However, when she randomly stumbled upon the same children's play set of building materials, which she brought with her to Los Angeles as a talisman, a slight sadness came over her. After all, she had had her hand raised to give up a childhood dream. After chatting with people for a while, Tina stepped aside to do a little dance, swaying from side to side. She closed her eyes and imagined herself on a deserted island, where the sound of the surf delighted her ears and the hot sand beckoned her to throw off her uncomfortable shoes. During the dreamy moments, Tina did not notice that someone approached her from behind, and a powerful male hand touched her waist, turning her around. The illusion of an island paradise shattered into pieces, and the indignant beauty prepared to fight back against the scoundrel, who had clearly allowed himself too much. Turning to the man and meeting the tender gaze of his eyes, Tina realized she was lost. Angry words froze in her chest. A tall man in a black tuxedo firmly took hold of her thoughts. "Let me ask you to dance, beautiful stranger," the man of her dreams said in a low velvet voice. Tina nodded in response, forgetting that she could speak. The man grinned, realizing the effect his presence had on the girl. He took the small hand in his own and led her away from the other dancing couples. A few minutes in his arms seemed like an eternity to her. When the song ended and the man removed his hands from his partner's slim waist, Tina felt disappointment. She wanted the pleasure she felt around this stranger to last as long as possible. Touching his lips to her arm, the man thanked her for the dance and suddenly disappeared. Just as he appeared, the tart scent of his woody perfume lingered in the air. Tina, who was in a state of euphoria, was soon found by her friend Catherine. The red-haired American in a cool scarlet suit confidently approached the girl and spoke in plain English. "Reporting to my ward." "Tina, what are you doing here?" "All alone. You know it's not safe. There's champagne flowing in this house. Anything could happen. There are so many men around. And you're a beautiful girl. You shouldn't have been so far away from me, should you?" "Catherine, I'm 18 years old and I'm not a child," replied Tina rather harshly. But when she saw that her friend was upset, she changed her anger into mercy. "You yourself insisted that I take self-defense courses. Don't worry about me, I just did a little dance. I'm fine, aren't I? You don't know what I've learned." The American girl started talking. "I'm whispering the latest gossip in your ear." "What is it this time?" "Catherine, you know I don't like gossip." "Listen to me for once. Do you know whose house this is and who organized the show?" "I bet you can't guess," Catherine said, pausing solemnly, and then continued Paul himself. "Can you imagine?" "Who is he?" the girl asked tiredly, wishing she could take off her uncomfortable stilettos as soon as possible. "What are you, a friend?" Catherine marveled. "Okay, I'm a married woman, but you should know potential suitors by sight. Paul is a very successful businessman, and he is also incredibly handsome. Women are all over him. But it's never been more than a fling." "Why would I want him like that?" Tina asked. You don't know what prospects will open up for you, silly. You will not always be young and pretty, said Catherine. That's why you have to prepare the ground for your future life now. I, for example, finished my career with dignity, opened a modeling agency. And you, if you become the wife of a businessman like Paul, you can conquer the world. I'm not interested in that, Tina replied. I'm only going to marry for love, not convenience. I met someone today, by the way. I just don't know his name. He's an amazing dancer. And he's got this honeyed voice. What? You seem to be really in love. Tina was interrupted by her friend. Well, nothing. Live with him in a rented apartment. When a man approached the microphone and spoke, Tina was horrified to recognize him as the very stranger she had given the dance to. But why didn't he introduce himself? This must be just some kind of game or joke, she thought, and clenched her fists with anger. Handsome, isn't he? Catherine said admiringly, admiring the man. Tina mumbled something inaudible in response and, pushing the girls aside, left the hall. She walked on, not caring what she was doing, forgetting that the uncomfortable stilettos were hurting her feet. She was angry, and her emotions demanded an outlet. Suddenly, however, someone grabbed her arm. She thought she had caught her bracelet on some trinket and turned around sharply. It was not right to spoil her aunt's gift of a gold filigree bracelet. She glanced at Paul, who was clearly running after her, and looked at him scornfully, then turned away, folding her arms across her chest. Tina, you must have misunderstood my intentions, Paul said. How do you know my name? I know the names of everyone in the show, he replied calmly. You must be very proud of your behavior, Tina exclaimed. You charmed a girl, then disappeared from sight without even giving your name. I can imagine you bragging to your friends that you've graduated to another model who's crazy about you. Tina shouted this in the heat of anger, not realizing she was giving herself away. So I've charmed you, then? The man said, smiling. Not at all, she denied, blushing. She realized that she had said too much. But you have just confessed your feelings to me. I'm the eldest son, but I don't have a hearing problem yet. If you let me, I'll try to explain. Okay, you have 5 minutes, Tina agreed. Great, said the businessman, amazed at the girl's boldness in putting conditions on him. The thing is that I really wanted to introduce myself at once, but I was afraid that you would perceive me not as an interesting person, but only as a money bag to be used. I was too often mistaken in my choice of soulmates and friends who only wanted money and connections from me. Do you really think I'm as empty as most of the people here? Tina said indignantly. No, I wouldn't run after a man just because he's rich. I could see it in your eyes when you saw me on stage at the microphone. You looked like a furious Amazon in that moment, Paul smiled. Please forgive me. Can I ever hope to be friends with you? But don't be silent, please. I see that you are still angry. How can I make amends? Don't ever lie to me again, Paul. More than anything else in the world, I can't stand lying, replied Tina in a serious voice. I'd like to get to know you better. Let's meet in the park next weekend. I'd love to, Paul replied. I won't hide my feelings from you. I like you very much. You're like a ray of sunshine coming into my life. He tried to kiss her hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tina dodged him. I don't know you at all, and you don't know me either. But who was she trying to deceive at this moment? She had dreamed most of all of his embrace. I don't agree with you, said Paul. I feel as if I had known you all my life, but I don't want to frighten you with my confession. Soon they returned to the guests who were waiting for the host. Seeing the couple, who looked stunning together, cameras were clicking from all sides. I'm sorry, my guest was so engrossed in looking around the house that she got completely lost, the man explained his absence. Luckily, I was there to help. What does that mean? Elizabeth ran up to her friend and demanded an explanation. "Elizabeth, Paul Sobolev is the stranger I told you about," Tina said. "He explained everything to me, and we're meeting in the park this weekend." "Wow. You're lucky, my friend. He's totally smitten with you. You can see it with the naked eye, but don't lose heart and get him to marry you," Elizabeth exclaimed. "I can just see your magnificent wedding that the Queen herself would envy. An old chateau in France, the cream of society, crystal glasses and bridesmaids in evening gowns. And you, my dear, in a luxurious dress with a train, custom made by the best designer." "Oh, your imagination is running wild, isn't it?" Tina laughed. "It's not the kind of wedding I'm dreaming of. A small, modest celebration on the ocean. I have tropical flowers in my hair. And most importantly, no shoes. Sometimes they just annoy me." "You have no imagination at all," categorically declared the girlfriend, having listened to the wedding dream of Tina. When the buffet was over, Tina was happy to go home. The clock showed 2, and her aunt was already resting, having never waited for her niece. She took a quick shower and changed into her favorite Mickey Mouse pajamas and got ready for sleep, which, despite her fatigue, never came. Tina thought of Paul, his brown eyes and good-natured smile that had completely enchanted her. "I wonder what Paul is really like," she wondered, and immediately fell into the arms of Morpheus. In her dream, the girl twirled in a waltz with a tall, dark-haired man who mesmerized her mind with ardent words of love. Suddenly, the light fell on his face. Tina recognized Paul as the dancer. He was dressed in a black shirt and matching colored pants. His eyes looked at her promisingly. There was a smile on his face that for some reason frightened Tina. "Will you be mine?" he growled. His beautiful face contorted and his eyes were bloodshot. In response to his words, a snide, mousy giggle erupted from all sides. Tina shrieked in horror and tried to pull away from Paul, but his strong arms held her tighter and tighter, denying her the ability to breathe. In the morning, Tina had no memory of her dream and was happy to share the emotions of last night. Her aunt, who listened to her carefully, wished to meet the man who had captured her niece's heart. The long-awaited weekend came unexpectedly quickly. For the date in the park, Tina wore denim overalls and a bright blue t-shirt with a bold, youthful inscription in English. She pinned her hair into 2 pigtails, then pinned it up in 2 buns on the side of her face, leaving a few strands out and curling them with a curling iron. She didn't wear any makeup, just a touch of pink lip balm and a dab of black mascara on her lashes. Satisfied with the result, Tina put on her thick-soled white sneakers and, kissing her aunt, hurried to the park. Paul was already waiting for her. He was sitting on a bench, and next to him was a huge bouquet of tea roses. The girl hardly recognized him without a suit and tie. Clad in a light sweater and worn jeans, he obviously felt out of place, constantly looking at his watch. But Tina liked this Paul even better. He looked no more than 35 years old. However, a slight grayness had already touched his black hair. Seeing the girl, he got up and handed her the flowers, not hiding his admiring look. "What beautiful flowers." Tina was pleased with the flowers, inhaling their sweetness and fragrance. "How long have you been waiting? I'm not late." "No, I'm so on time. I just got here early. I was afraid I'd be late," Paul replied. "Let's go for a walk." Tina bravely took the man's hand, and they walked along the shady alley, densely planted with trees. They walked around the park, talking about everything: movies, music, literature, things they liked and disliked. For a few hours they learned a lot about each other, rode on the rides. After visiting the Room of Fear and eating cotton candy, the young people realized that now they could hardly live without each other. Tina and Paul tried to meet each other every chance they got. Together they went to the theater, to the ballet, to the movies, to restaurants and cafes. The happy girl introduced Aunt Hillary to her fiancé, who made the most favorable impression on the old woman. After all, the man was educated, intelligent, and polite. In addition, he idolized her niece and literally carried her in his arms. It was clearly going to be a wedding. To everyone's surprise, this joyous moment came unexpectedly quickly. One day, Tina returned home after dinner with her beloved in a luxurious restaurant with a coveted ring on her ring finger. The diamond in the white gold ring was obscenely large and shone so bright that everyone in the modeling agency almost choked with envy, looking at the masterpiece of jewelry art. Tina herself could not get used to the fact that she was now a bride and would soon be the wife of her favorite man. Admiring the stone, the girl imagined a family life with a man dear to her heart. But who said that dreams don't come true? After meeting Tina's parents, whom Paul also charmed, it was decided to celebrate the wedding in the fall in an ancient Scottish castle, which had belonged to his family for many years. Tina balked as much as she could, but her lover quickly convinced her of his idea, going for a little trickery. He proposed to arrange a small vacation and go to Scotland for a few days to admire the natural beauty of a unique and mysterious country. Darling, just imagine a little picnic at the edge of Loch Ness, whose dark, ominous waters hold secrets and reflect the gloomy walls of an ancient castle, Paul said. And you will also love the high mountains and crystal clear lakes lost in the mountains, picturesque villages, fragrant heathlands. And then I'll show you the castle. They say it's been haunted for years. You make it sound so interesting that I'm ready to go on a trip right now, Tina agreed. Scotland really struck her in the heart with its ancient castles, flowery meadows, and centuries-old history, which was enthusiastically whispered in the ear of her beloved Paul, who was well acquainted with the traditions and customs of this country. And when they drove up to the castle, which belonged to her fiancé, the girl could not hide her admiration. The majestic building with time-worn gray walls covered with ivy against the background of emerald meadows looked impressive. Tina froze with delight. She had changed her mind and agreed with her lover that the castle was the best option for the wedding feast. The inside of the manor was as superb as the outside. Feeling like a fairy tale princess, the girl walked through the numerous rooms, anticipating how magical the staircases decorated with white lilies and cream roses would look, and from the ceilings would hang crystal chandeliers, flickering in the flames of candles. Tina was particularly struck by the spiral staircase that led up to a small tower. From the windows there was a marvelous view of the garden bathed in the golden red rays of the sunset. In the distance, on the grassy slopes, a flock of sheep grazed, and shepherds kept watch over the flock, deftly controlling the dogs. After dinner in the beautifully furnished living room with a real fireplace and ancient tapestries, Tina went to the bedroom, where a luxurious 4-poster bed occupied half the room. By the way, there were about 30 rooms in the castle, as well as a wine cellar, a spacious pantry, a kitchen, a library, and a stone hall. Out of all the proposed bedrooms, the girl liked the silver room the most, where the walls, furniture, and carpets were made in noble silver shades, striking with its luxury even the most refined and demanding persons. Tina looked into a huge mirror in a silver frame in the form of intertwined patterns and mythical animals, and remembered a legend that said that mirrors contained the souls of all those who looked into them, putting fears and doubts aside. The girl approached her reflection and began brushing her hair. Then she changed into the finest silk shirt and went to bed. How nice it was to be covered with a downy blanket. During the night, she wished she had brought her pajamas from home to keep her warm on a chilly night. Instead, her closet was dominated by lace and silk nightgowns. Who would have thought that even in summer it could be chilly in Scotland? After midnight, a thunderstorm suddenly broke out. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the room. Thunder rumbled. Rain poured down like a bucket. The figures of unicorns and mermaids on the lamps seemed to come to life and began dancing on the silver patina walls. Suddenly, one of the windows opened and raindrops fell on the face of the girl, who was sleeping soundly and did not hear the sounds of the weather. Instantly awake, Tina ran to the window and closed the latch tightly. On her way back, she caught a glimpse of some movement in the corner of the room, and for a moment the mirror reflected a pale girl in an opulent dress with diamonds in her pitch-black hair. "Be careful. He's not who he says he is," she whispered, and in an instant she was gone like smoke. Tina went to bed, writing off the vision as fatigue and imagination. After all, the day before, her fiancé had told her about the ghosts that haunted the castle. After spending a few fabulous days in Scotland, Tina and Paul returned to New York to begin preparations for the wedding celebration. The young people had a lot to catch up on. There were only a couple of months left until the scheduled day. In addition, the future spouses were incredibly busy. Paul was preparing a contract with the Japanese, and Tina participated in several shows and photo shoots. The girl had nothing left but to ask for help from her only friend, who helped the bride to choose a wedding dress, veil, shoes, and other accessories. Her choice fell on a lace gown, hand-embroidered with pearls and tiny diamonds with an open back and a long train. The bride's head was to be adorned with a luxurious tiara. Meanwhile, all the newspapers were full of headlines that Paul Smith was getting married, and his chosen one was a young model, Tina Johnson. Some did not hesitate to write a blatant lie that Tina is expecting a child. But it was not true at all. The lovers had a pure and chaste relationship, and if Paul sometimes allowed himself to go further than kisses and hugs, Tina gently stopped him. More than anything else in the world, she wanted to belong to him body and soul, but she was determined to wait until the wedding. Tina herself did not notice how in the pleasant cares and wedding troubles came the most important day in her life. The girl, like all brides, was terribly worried that everything went smoothly. Preparation for the wedding was carried out with great scope, planning to become the event of the year. According to the designer's idea, the wedding was to be held in medieval style. On the eve of the celebration, more than 100 invitations were sent out, offering guests to plunge into a romantic Scottish fairy tale. The guests were happy to support the thematic idea of the wedding. Stately men in luxurious camisoles, embroidered with gold and silver threads, led their ladies by the hand, as if competing with each other by the richness and sophistication of their outfits. There was a light floral fragrance of lilies and tea roses in the air, which exquisitely decorated the columns and staircases. The knight's armor had been properly cleaned and shone in the stone hall, reflecting the flashes of fire. The designer's efforts had more than paid off. All the guests admiringly discussed the ancient Scottish castle. The day before the wedding turned into a luxurious citadel. Even Paul Smith's foreign partners were impressed by the grand show in the style of a jousting tournament. Every girl at least once in her life dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, just like a real princess. But then she grows up. They do not part with dreams of a beautiful prince in shining armor who will take her far away on his white horse. And so Tina stood in the silver wedding days in which she had spent her very first night in the castle and felt a vague uneasiness. Her mother Hilary was at her only daughter's side, helping her into her wedding dress. "Daughter, I can see that something is troubling you," Hilary began the conversation, noticing that her daughter was as sad and silent as ever. "Have you had a quarrel with Paul? Share your worries with me, and I'll make you feel better." "Ah, Mommy, I'm very happy," Tina objected, "but I keep getting a bad feeling that something bad is going to happen." "It's nothing. It's just fatigue and excitement. I thought you and your fiancé weren't going well, but don't have those bad thoughts. When I married your daddy, I was worried sick and fainted." "Really? Surprised, girl? You never told me about it?" "What's there to brag about? Your mom was always a coward, but marrying your dad gave me strength and confidence, and then we had our little miracle who we loved more than life. I still can't believe that my little girl has grown up and is getting married," the woman said with tears in her eyes. "Honey, I love you so much." "I love you too, Mommy. You and Daddy are the closest people to me in the whole world, and I'm glad to hear these words. But you have to remember your husband too. Paul will be your nearest and dearest now. And Daddy and I will take a back seat. We will see you often and dream of grandchildren, with whom we will be able to relive the best moments in life. I dream of a big and close family too, said Tina. Paul is very nice and will probably be a great father to our children, said Hillary. I know, honey. I think he's a decent man. Everyone says good things about him, and he loves you so much. Don't worry, baby. You'll be very happy. Just like Daddy and me. And now we must get down to the guests. And your fiancé is waiting for you, so get all that nonsense out of your pretty little head. Tina cheered up from her mother's wise advice, hugged her tightly and pressed herself against her chest, just like in her childhood, when she woke up from the sounds of thunderstorms. Yes, Mommy, you're right, agreed the girl. Now I'm ready to go out to the guests. Tina was led down the aisle by her father, proud of his beautiful daughter. That's the kind of daughter any father dreams of. Kind, caring, friendly, and hardworking, she never upset Daddy with her behavior or actions. And now his girl finally and irrevocably entered adulthood. Barely holding back tears, Stephen walked the bride down the aisle, handing her main treasure to Paul, the groom. Paul, not holding back his admiration, looked at his beloved and did not notice anyone around him. Having pronounced the words of vows, the newlyweds kissed under loud applause and cheers from all sides. The guests hurried to congratulate the young people, wishing them a happy married life and beautiful, healthy children, said some. Despite all the fears of the bride, the wedding celebration went flawlessly, without quarrels, fights, or any other unpleasant incidents. At midnight, Tina and Paul left the guests and left on a private jet for their wedding trip to the Maldives. Their first wedding night, like a magical fairy tale, took place in the villa that Paul rented for their honeymoon. The beach with snow-white sand, like powdered sugar, and the warm Indian Ocean were the perfect place for a romantic vacation for lovers. Tina's generous husband did not stingy, choosing the most luxurious two-story villa of all offered. Several bedrooms, living room, study, gym, and spa were at their disposal. On one side, panoramic windows overlooked the giant pool located in the backyard. On the other side, the panoramic windows overlooked the ocean whose gentle waves lapped the secluded beach. After flying to Dream Island, the newlyweds hurried to the ocean. Tina gladly put her face to the salty wind, inhaling the scent of freedom. Paul approached her and drew her to him. Let's go for a swim, he suggested, and headed toward the water. Don't be afraid, we're all alone here. The water is wonderful. The full moon was shining in the sky, illuminating everything around with its mysterious light, myriads of stars in the sky, like myriads of fireflies. Suddenly the night sky lit up with a golden glow. A bright point rushed to the ground like a fallen meteorite. It's a sign. And what a sign. A shooting star. We should make a wish immediately, Tina thought to herself. The girl hurried to make her wish. I want a simple woman's happiness. And as if mesmerized, stepped into the water, following her husband. The water was indeed incredibly warm. Having bathed enough, the young people went to the villa. In the morning, the newlyweds had a rich and hearty breakfast: Viennese waffles, toast with cheese and ham, a fruit basket, oriental sweets, and freshly squeezed juice. Pouring the juice into a tall carafe, they joked and fooled around, feeding each other fruit and sweets. This was how the days of their honeymoon passed uncomplicatedly. From morning until evening they relaxed in the hammock, sunbathed and splashed in the ocean, enjoying each other's company. Sometimes the lovers left the island to unwind. Sea walks, diving, and excursions allowed them to get acquainted with the life on the island, traditions and customs of the locals. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, but the day before the end of the vacation, tragedy happened. Paul, an excellent swimmer and diver, decided to surprise his beloved by jumping into the water from the pier. He noticed too late that the tide was out. Hitting his head on the bottom, the man lost consciousness, He was saved by Tina, who fortunately could swim quite well. Rushing to her husband's aid, the fragile girl pulled him ashore on her own. The adrenaline rush and fear for her lover's life must have done their job. After contacting the emergency services, Tina managed to get Paul loaded onto a boat and taken to a local clinic, where doctors made a disappointing diagnosis: concussion. But the worst part was a fractured spine. Everything after that was a blur. All this time, Tina was next to her husband, holding his hand tightly. She didn't eat and hardly slept. She flew to Chicago in a tracksuit, not having time to change and take things from the villa. After all, Paul needed urgent medical attention, on which much depended. To the best clinics in Chicago. The diagnosis of Maldivian doctors unfortunately confirmed. Paul courageously underwent several operations on the spine. As no one else, he was supported by his wife, taking care of him and instilling faith and hope. The girl had to forget about her modeling career to always be close to her beloved. However, Tina never once reproached her husband for his illness, perfectly understanding that he is much harder than she is, and just one careless word can deeply hurt the spouse. Yes, it wasn't easy for her. Not the kind of family life I dreamed of, thought the young girl. At night, while Paul slept, she cried in the bathroom, and in the morning smiled at her husband. Meanwhile, Tina was upstairs. Hearing the clinking of broken glass from her husband's room, she rushed to help. The girl stumbled and carelessly rolled down the stairs. Her parents found Tina a minute later in a pool of blood. At the hospital, it turned out that she got off lightly, miraculously having broken nothing. The baby, strangely enough, was fine. At the girl's request, she was discharged, although the doctors insisted on hospitalization. But Tina was in a hurry to see her husband, and without hesitation, signed a refusal of hospitalization. During the night, she started bleeding, and the girl lost the baby. From that moment in their family came a black streak. Once happy spouses stopped talking to each other. At the same time, everyone blamed themselves Paul for trying to get up early, and Tina could not forgive herself for her own carelessness and refusal of medical supervision. But time heals wounds. A year and a half later, Paul was already moving on crutches, then with a cane, and then began to walk on his own, occasionally holding on to the walls. Tina tried to return to the modeling business, but it turned out that everyone forgot about her. On the catwalk now shone new stars. In dire need of money, Tina took any job, starring in dubious commercials and photo shoots. They paid little, but it was better than nothing. The girl had to sell all her expensive jewelry and branded things to hold out as long as possible. In time, Paul got a job in a prestigious firm, and thanks to his talent, rapidly rose up the career ladder. Although life began to get better, there was still a chill and alienation in the family. The loss of a child had a negative impact on both. And after all, the long-awaited baby should have further strengthened their union. But fate was favorable to their family and allowed them to feel like parents again. When Tina became pregnant, the ice between the spouses melted, giving way to love, tenderness, and affection. Throughout the pregnancy, Tina took care of her health, remembering the unsuccessful previous pregnancy. The girl walked in the fresh air, ate properly, and tried not to tire herself with physical exertion. But it did not help much, and soon the future mommy learned the terrible news: her child has a heart defect, with which children, as a rule, do not live long. The young parents traveled to all clinics in Los Angeles, hoping for a mistake of doctors in deciphering the ultrasound. But the miracle did not happen. In a few months, Tina was to give birth to a sick child who could leave them at any moment. To Tina's horror, Paul insisted on terminating the pregnancy. Shocked by his behavior, the girl did not recognize the former, loving and tender spouse. Come on, this child will not survive anyway. It is better to do it at once than to say goodbye to him. After a year of suffering and agony, the man tried to explain to his wife his point of view. I will not allow my child to be harmed. It would break me. Don't you understand that? Tina objected with tears in her eyes. What if it's just a mistake? We'll get rid of our little angel with our own hands. Are you deaf? The baby's sick. Half of Los Angeles told you that. The most humane thing we can do as parents is to put him out of his misery. Do you enjoy carrying around the sick and injured? Personally, I don't. Anyway, I shouldn't have gotten involved with you. Because you're defective. You ruined your first child and now you want to give me a sick one. How can you say that? Tina couldn't believe her ears. After all, I took care of you, kept quiet, tolerated your character, and finally sacrificed my career for you. And now you blame me for not keeping our baby. Didn't anyone ask you to do that? What a Mother Teresa. Tina, I'm telling you one more time, if you don't get rid of the baby, it's over between us. Paul, please tell me you're just joking around. Don't leave us, please. We really need your help. The doctors say a heart defect isn't a cure. If we operate, the baby has a good chance of living a full life. Ah, yes, a miracle operation that's going to cost me a fortune. Have you forgotten that I'm not rich anymore? Or are you suggesting I sell my parents' castle in Scotland? No way. These doctors won't even guarantee the baby's recovery. Paul, I don't recognize you. When did you become such a devil? When I married you, spent a lot of money on the wedding, the honeymoon, and nearly became an invalid after spending my entire fortune on medical treatment. When I married you. It's easy to be kind when you're rich. It's easy to be kind when you're rich. Try doing good deeds when you're poor and have no money, Paul said. If you want to know, I'm glad it turned out this way. I have another woman, and she, unlike you, will be able to give me healthy children. Paul's last words sounded to Tina like a thunderbolt. The girl could not breathe, stunned by the betrayal of the man she loved. Tina regretted only one thing, that her husband had revealed his despicable nature so late. In one thing she was sure of 100%, she would keep the child and, if necessary, at the cost of her life. Not wishing to remain in this house, the owner of which brought her so much pain, the girl hurriedly packed her things and left for Aunt Hilary, who was deeply affected by Paul's deed. "There, Auntie, my dream has come true," said Tina. "Remember the night before Christmas when we went to the ballet? Paul is the stranger who turned into a giant rat. I sacrificed my life for him and the girl didn't finish and cried. Honey, remember the baby. It is absolutely contraindicated for you to worry and get upset," answered Hilary. "My parents and I will help you as much as we can. Catherine, I think, won't refuse either because she is your best friend. We will definitely apply to the aid fund and get our little girl to have an operation. If necessary, I'll sell all my jewelry and even my apartment." "My darling, don't cry. Please don't cry," the aunt continued. "Aunt, how can I thank you for your kindness and care? But the last thing I want is for you to lose your apartment. I will go to work if necessary. I will not eat and sleep, but I will save my little girl. And we're going to help you do it. Now you need a good night's sleep. You'll sleep better in the morning." "Okay, I think I'll go to my room. Thank you for everything," Tina said and went to her bedroom. She lay on the bed, unable to close her eyes, and it was not until morning that she was able to fall asleep. In her sleep, Tina held the healthy little girl to her chest and cried, kissing her chubby pink cheeks and stroking her soft hair. The little girl looked just like her. The same blonde-haired angel with blue eyes. The next morning, Catherine came to Aunt Hilary's house and began to scold Paul in harsh terms. She and her husband David did not refuse to help. "An old acquaintance," Catherine said. Catherine, through old connections, was able to get Tina to participate in several shows and photo shoots for pregnant women, for which the girl was paid decent money. Auntie still sold her jewelry, and Tina's parents sent a tidy sum, which they saved to buy a dacha. Sincere fans of Tina, penetrated by her story, sent money and things for the baby. When the baby was born, The girl named her Elizabeth, so that the angels would keep and protect her. The girl herself looked like a tiny angel. When Tina saw her daughter for the first time, she cried with happiness. The foundation was not left out either. Its founders agreed with the best surgeons in Israel, and the child underwent heart surgery. The prognosis of the Israeli doctors was promising. Little Elizabeth grew up to the joy of her mother, grandparents, and a completely ordinary child. The young mother had no time left for shows, but she had to live on something. Tina was no longer going to follow her relatives. Then the girl decided to finish New York State University of Construction, which at one time abandoned for the sake of modeling career. She became a part-time student. Studying was a joy for her. Tina did not notice how she finished her studies with honors. Red diploma helped her to get a job as a secretary in a leading construction firm. Pretty girl with a pleasant smile at first sight won the heart of the director of the company, Robin. However, Tina immediately made it clear to the man that she is only interested in work and nothing more. Over time, she was able to move up the career ladder, proving to everyone that she has not only a pretty appearance but also an analytical mind. Approaching creatively to the fulfillment of tasks and assignments, the girl always handed over objects on time, while not allowing the presence of errors or negligence in her subordinates. Tina began to occupy a high position in the firm, in which she came to work without work experience and any recommendations. All employees respected the boss, who with her labor and enthusiasm raised the firm to unprecedented heights. And how could it be otherwise? Because she was engaged in her favorite business. Tina was appreciated and respected not only for her determination and professionalism. A harsh but fair woman was kind and humane to her subordinates. In this firm worked a girl named Sophia, with whom Tina began a friendly relationship. The girl was a little younger than Tina, and something was similar to her boss. One day Sophia came to work and solemnly announced that she was getting married soon. Colleagues began to congratulate the girl. Tina, who was curious to know who was the chosen one of her new friend, was not left out. During the lunch break, she called Sophia to the cafe to ask her about everything. The girl willingly agreed, and a few hours later the friends sat in a cozy cafe discussing the upcoming wedding. "Tina, have you ever been married?" Sophia asked, enjoying a strong espresso. "Mrs. Smith replied, not knowing what to say. She didn't want to tell about her failed marriage, so as not to scare the girl in love with her sad story. "So did you or didn't you?" "I know that you have a child, and with her father you have a strained relationship. Is that true, or are the girls just making it up?" "It's hard to call a relationship strained if it doesn't exist." Yes, I was married, and my ex-husband doesn't want to hang out with Elizabeth. Although I didn't forbid them to see each other. He just cut our daughter out of his life." "But why? Can a father abandon his own child?" "Yes, he can. If that man is Paul Smith." "What did you say, Paul Smith?" the girl repeated, not believing her ears. "Yes, you see, Sophia, I didn't always work for a construction firm. I was once a catwalk star, and then, like a fool, I fell in love with a man I didn't know very well. All he wanted was an heir. Tina began to tell me. My first pregnancy came just as Paul had accidentally injured his spine on a wedding trip while I was caring for him, as a result of an accidental fall down the stairs. I lost the baby. Paul changed a lot towards me after learning about this misfortune. But fate gave us a happy opportunity to feel like parents again. But little Catherine was born with a congenital heart defect and was not needed by her father. It's hard to believe, but he insisted on terminating the pregnancy. I still remember the look on his face and the hatred in his eyes for the fact that I could not give him the long-awaited heir. Now, thanks to the help of friends and family, my daughter is completely healthy." "Sophia, why are you looking so pale? Are you not feeling well?" "I'm fine. I'm just a little dizzy. Maybe I shouldn't have had such strong coffee." I'm going out for a minute. I need to freshen up a bit. Can I help you? Tina asked thoughtfully, offering to help. No, it's okay. I'll be right back, she said, and headed toward the ladies' room. The same question was going through her mind. Is our kind and caring Paul really Tina's ex-husband? Is her fiancé the same monster who abandoned his own daughter? Or is it just a ridiculous coincidence? Meanwhile, Sophia's cell phone rang, which she had left on the table. Tina glanced at the phone and recoiled in horror as if it were a rattlesnake. A picture of Paul Smith with the caption "Beloved" popped up on the screen. Tina realized with horror what a stupid thing she had done, accidentally telling Sophia the truth about her fiancé. What are we going to do now? Suddenly Paul is different. Suddenly he's no longer selfish, thinking only of himself. I seem to have just ruined his wedding. Somehow poor Sophia, Tina thought, and got up to go in search of her friend. However, there was no need to look for the girl. She herself came to the table and sat down on the sofa. No one called me, Sophia said. I heard the call. I guess your fiancé called you? Sophia picked up the phone and, deciding to finally understand the situation, called her fiancé and invited him to a cafe that was not far from his work. A few minutes later, the joyful man entered the cafe and froze in place, recognizing in Tina his ex-wife, who was sitting opposite his fiancé. Tina noticed him too. Her eyes widened with surprise. Life had taken its toll on Paul over the years. He was not old, but he was still irresistible. There were gray hairs in his thick hair, and the treacherous wrinkles at the corners of his eyes and lips betrayed the bitter fate he had suffered. He regretted his harsh words 100 times and longed to get in touch with his only daughter, Catherine. But he was ashamed to appear in front of Tina, who even now looked at him contemptuously. She, unlike him, had not changed a bit, still as slender and beautiful. Paul, you're just in time. Have a seat and meet my friend. Does she remind you of anyone? Or maybe she reminds you of your ex-wife who gave you the baby you gave up. When were you going to tell me about this? At the wedding or after? How can I trust you after everything that has happened? Sophia asked with pain in her voice. I knew revenge was a dish to be served cold, but I never thought you'd ruin my life, which was just starting to get better. Do you really hate me that much? Paul said, turning to Tina. I'm sorry, Tina whispered, feeling guilty about the lovers' quarrel. I didn't mean to, it just happened. Tina didn't do anything wrong. She didn't know you were my fiancé. The truth came out by accident, but I'm glad it did. I will never marry a man who has no heart, Sophia shouted, throwing her wedding ring at the groom, and ran out of the cafe. Paul rushed after her, but the girl had already disappeared around the corner in a cab. The man had no choice but to return to the cafe. I'm sorry, please, Tina said. I really didn't mean for things to turn out this way. You're the one who's sorry. Fate punished me severely for my selfishness and indifference. I didn't value my happiness, and that's why I gave it up so easily, Paul replied. You should not apologize to me, but to your daughter Catherine, who miraculously survived. Why didn't you even try to visit her, to ask how she was doing? I was ashamed to show my face to you, the man admitted. To her surprise, Tina saw tears in his eyes, which he tried to hide, not wanting to admit weakness. For a moment it seemed as if the long years that had divided their lives into before and after were gone. In front of her sat the old Paul, whom she had come to love with all her heart and soul. At that moment, Tina realized with horror that she still loved her former husband. You want to see your daughter? She's beautiful. Don't worry, I didn't say anything bad about you to Catherine. Neither did her mother. If you can, forgive me. I'm very guilty before you, whispered Paul, touching her hand. In his eyes, the woman saw the same fire of love that burned in her heart. Let's go home and I'll introduce you to my daughter, Tina replied, pretending to be dry and emotionless. At home, they were greeted by a blonde angelic girl with a stuffed rabbit in her arms. The little girl did look like her mother, but her features were also those of her father, who looked at her and couldn't get enough of his own little girl. Tears flowed down his cheeks. The man did not restrain his emotions and squatted down, hugged the baby, pressing her to his chest. "Mommy, who is it?" inquired the curious little girl. "Baby, remember you asked me where your daddy was and why he wasn't with us? Well, you see, he is. He was far away from us and couldn't visit you, my dear. Though he wished it more than anything in the world. Every night he saw your beautiful face and dreamed of meeting you. And then one day his dream came true and he found you and me," Tina told her daughter. "Daddy, I love you so much. I knew it. I believed you would find us," cried the baby and threw herself on her father's chest, hugging him with her arms. "It was the angels who brought Daddy back to us, didn't they?" "Mom? I know it's angels. I often see them in my dreams and even play catch-up with them. I love you too, my darling girl. Now, tell me more about your dream. I want to know everything," Paul said. "But you play here and I'll go and put the kettle on," said Tina, and went to the kitchen. "I saw a lot of light in my dream," Catherine began her story. "It was soft pink and slightly shimmering. It even hurt my eyes. Suddenly I heard laughter, a resounding, merry one. It seemed to come from everywhere at once and throbbed in my temples. I felt calm and joyful. As I took a step toward the light, I felt an unprecedented lightness in my whole body. My feet left the ground, and I floated smoothly to the clouds." "What happened then?" Paul asked. "I woke up," the little girl said disappointedly. "It's nothing. I'm sure they'll come to play with you again." "So you believe me?" "Because Mom and Grandma say that it's my fantasy. I'm flying because I'm growing." "Of course I believe you. I'm sure the angels came to play with you. They love little children so much that they come to them in their dreams. There's a reason they call you Catherine. Do you want me to tell you my secret?" "Of course, Daddy," enthusiastically said the girl, making herself comfortable on the sofa. "I've never dreamed of angels, but that I have a guardian angel. I know for sure," said the man. "If it were not for him, I would hardly be sitting next to you. Yes, I have protectors. I'm not making it up. Ever since I was a child, in moments of danger, I have heard a quiet voice that helps me and gives me advice," Paul continued. "I remember the first time I heard my invisible counselor. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old at the time. No more. We were walking through the forest with the boys, picking mushrooms. I was a little behind them, and suddenly I heard clearly stop. A father sets up a camera to save his fading daughter. And after barely a glance at the tape, Jane decided at an early age that girls were either beautiful or smart. The girl knew full well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. In front of her eyes was the example of her older sister, Ellen. Everyone around admired her beauty. I mean, come on. Light blonde hair, silky green mermaid eyes. A figure they call such a model. Helene, from an early age, was focused only on her appearance. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diets, and so on. And Kate's girlfriends were exactly the same. Jane thought they were pretty, frivolous fools. A mother raising 2 daughters alone had high hopes for her eldest. "When you marry well, Ellen, we'll have a good life," she used to say. Jane was still a very young girl, studying in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How could one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did her mother, who had been burned herself, not draw the right conclusions? Once Jane asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too, and he left us, went to a younger and prettier, and left nothing for you or the children, because she had a good appetite. And now you're telling Ellen to do the same thing, so she'll do the same." blaspheme on your tongue. Mum shook her hands. Helene is different. Firstly, she's young, and secondly, she's much prettier than me. And anyway, she has me. I'm the one who had to figure it out. And I'll help her, and I'll teach her everything. You'll be fine, and so will you, if you listen to me. Jane just sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful and kind, but she was too easygoing. Both her mother and Ellen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. Everyone dreamed of a beautiful life, believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But it wasn't so for everyone. Jane differed from her peers' warehouse of character, has always been pragmatic, responsible, far-sighted. And she clearly understood that, in order to achieve something in this life, you need to work hard. And the options that have in mind mother and older sister, rich men, benefactors, it's all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Ellen jokingly called her little sister a bore. Her mother was always trying to remake Jane, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting thing is that the parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. She said, "I'm worried about your future. How can you not understand? You are a beauty. We got such a one. You got the best from me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Don't be such a bore. Men like cheerful, smiling women." "No, thank you," Jane replied. "After school, I'm going to study economics." "But do you know what the competition is?" Ellen would always argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 inches in the head, or you have to have a good deal of goodwill." "Yes," Mum sighed. "We can't afford commercial education. And you can't get in for free." But Jane, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives. He had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies of alimony, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Jane knew from childhood that she could not count on him. The girl in her heart wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that, perhaps, the character she went just in it, because the mother and Helen Jane did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters. And Jane didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Dad was a businessman, owned a chain of shops, so sort of made good money. But all his property was prudently written down on the new wife, so that the ex-wife and children did not claim anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Jane should have been as resentful of her father as her mother was, as Ellen was. But Jane had a dream to study to be an economist, to start her own business, and one day to meet her father on some business a joint project, a profitable contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had achieved on her own, without his help. And then maybe they could talk as equals. And Jane achieved her goal. She got into the budget, to the same economics faculty, where she was so eager to go. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. She was screaming right in front of the computer monitor, jumping from happiness to the ceiling. "You're crazy," Ellen said as she looked into the room with little Andrew in her arms. She had recently become a mother and had a son with a rich man. He paid child support, but he was reluctant to communicate with his mother and Andrew himself. Needless to say, these alimony were pennies, a standard scheme, gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Ellen still repeated the fate of her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continue to dream of a prince who will definitely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. It was not surprising. Jane was also happy to take care of the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Was it not clear? The plan is not very good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Ellen was still looking for rich men on dating sites. I got in. Jane explained her strange behavior to her sister. Wow. Cool. So what, you're leaving us for the big city now? You're going to go to school? Jane and her family actually lived in a city too, but a very small one, far from the regional center. So gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Not a village by documents, of course, but in fact it is a village. That's why Orchardville, the regional capital, where Jane's university was located, was called just town. Her mother, too, was happy to hear of her youngest daughter's admission. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, she thought. Let her dream, show off, and when she realizes that nothing has worked out, she will follow in her mother's footsteps to the supermarket for the cash register. But also will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives realize, it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it all turned out. Jane got in. Well done, the daughter hugged the younger mother. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I won't be able to send much money, but at least a little for housing and living expenses. Again, you need to dress nicely. There's a better chance of meeting a decent man in a big city. Mum, there you go again, Jane smiled. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Jane knew it wasn't easy for her mother to get the money, but she was willing to help her daughter while she was a student. And that's priceless. Jane had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, though not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls. But the roommates turned out to be very pleasant. Both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Jane herself, were focused on study and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Kate, Jane even became friends. They stayed in touch even after they finished their studies and moved out to rented flats. Jane liked her studies. She was convinced in her first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy, lectures seemed interesting, and term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Jane even began to earn money. It turned out that people were willing to pay a lot of money by her standards, of course, for essays and projects. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs and similar entertainments. And sometimes, of course, Jane wanted to go for a walk, to unwind. But she realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to top up her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Jane knew that it was a significant part of her mother's salary, and she was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. Still, it was the help from her mom that kept Jane afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before it was possible to live in it for free. Jane saved money on literally everything. But she couldn't keep up. She knew that she was going to her goal, which means that sooner or later everything will be fine. Everything will be fine. Everything will be as she dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, an event happened that made Jane reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when, before the New Year, students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Jane was just getting ready for a credit in economic history when she received a phone call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl was smiling broadly and looked like a star. Jane knew at once that something was wrong. Ellen would not call her at the 3rd hour of the night. It was Jane who was awake, preparing for exams. And her sister herself at that time should be having her 7th dream. Mom's in trouble. Ellen's voice rang through the receiver. It seemed she was close to hysterics. Come over. What's wrong? Jane felt her limbs grow cold and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety gripped her heart with an icy hand. Was she alive? But it was impossible to get a coherent answer from Ellen. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the receiver, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was afraid and badly off, as if the trouble had happened in the evening, but Ellen was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago, and she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, at that moment there was no question of any credits and exams. Jane took the first flight home in the morning. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Jane found her sister in a terrible state, her hair disheveled, her face swollen with tears. In her arms she held her youngest daughter, Lillian, a baby girl. Ellen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son, Andrew, then two girls, yearlings, Chris and Lillian. None of the fathers were involved in the upbringing of the children. The princes, sons of wealthy parents, refused to raise offspring and basked in money. With Helene, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And she kept stepping on the same rake, getting pregnant on purpose in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to me, how will I cope with them alone? Ellen looked at Jane with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Jane was ready to hit her sister at that moment. She didn't know what was wrong with her mother, and she was only thinking about herself. "How did it happen?" she asked. "They had a corporate party," Ellen said, rocking her daughter. "They must have been drinking. They told me Mum was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot while it was being sorted out. While they were sorting it out. I got a call late last night, and I called you straight away." "So Mum's alive?" Jane clarified. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? "A hospital not far away." Jane jumped out of the house, hailed a taxi. She had to get there as soon as possible. She had to find out what was wrong with her loved one. At the hospital, Jane got the terrible news. Mum's gone. She'd only recently passed away. As Jane rushed to the clinic, it all happened in the ICU. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious. And Jane would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma. And still the girl blamed herself for her carelessness, for not supporting her mother by the hand while she was still alive. Jane was signing some papers when she received a phone call from a sobbing Ellen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time. Arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who had to look after her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just no, that's all. The father did not turn up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Jane realized that she would not meet or communicate with this man, even when she reached the top of her career. He didn't need her and Ellen and Mum. Neither did they need him. There was no resentment. No, it's just that Jane suddenly realized her father was a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but Dad is a stranger. He's just a stranger, and that says it all. Ellen, on the other hand, is her own person. She needs support. Ellen sobbed nonstop for days. Jane didn't stop her. Let her cry it out. It would make her feel better. While her sister dealt with her grief, Jane helped her with her nieces. The little ones made her smile even in such a dreadful situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. The nieces, like nothing else, showed Jane that life goes on. Jane could not stay with her sister for long. Jane thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So she'd have to drop out. And where to go? Go home to her parents' flat? Her mother's new boyfriend is already living there. A young and kind of nice guy named George. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works on a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to like Ellen a lot, and he's taken in her kids. Maybe they'll actually make a family. Jane's not really needed there right now. And she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Jane loves her very much. She's the only person in the whole world who's family. But still, Jane's used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family of many children. You can't do that there. And after all, I don't want to leave Chicago. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. There are more prospects for work and study here. The urban settlement, where Jane's childhood was spent, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. You know, I think I'll take you up on your offer. Jane smiled at the rector. What a clever girl, asked the man. You're good. Everything will work out for you. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We'll be waiting for you. Deal? It's a deal. Thank you so much for the offer. That same night, Jane started looking for a job. She urgently needed money just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head, the most effective motivation. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic for a girl with an incomplete university degree to find anything close to the desired profession. Jane was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Jane realized that it was time to give up her dream of working as an economist, or rather to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, she had to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things got better. There were plenty of jobs for Jane: waitress, cleaner, saleswoman, but the wages were meager. No, it was enough to live on, especially if you saved money. But Jane had to save up for a year's study. With those salaries, it was impossible. Still, Jane needed a job badly. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. There were plenty of reasons for the job. Firstly, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Jane the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order, and an extra penny in the piggy bank, and brains are not idle. That's the upside. Jane even liked working in the bar. The team is friendly and friendly. The bosses are loyal. The crowd was decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about their reputation. The atmosphere was monitored. Undesirable elements were expelled with guards and not allowed back in. And another and another. Local band musicians, performers, and visiting guests gathered here every night. In short, live music, and it was beautiful. Jane enjoyed listening to the musicians perform, singing along, dancing. This was welcome in the bar. To work as on holiday. In the bar, Jane finally understood the meaning of this common phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there was not much money. Jane was looking for another job in parallel, a higher-paying one. But the girl knew, even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Jane through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go anywhere, but the girl was finally able to return to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in the rock bar that Jane met Jasper. One day, the host introduced the guests to a new rock band which appeared just a couple of months ago. Jasper was the bass player. But not only that, It was he who owned the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but constantly observing the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. Jasper was the main man in the team. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, it was felt. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Jane immediately singled him out and reached for him. She didn't recognize herself. Jane realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on getting back on track at university. She couldn't be distracted by that. And yet, Jasper didn't flirt with the waitresses, didn't talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Maybe that's what attracted the girl. Jasper was a lot like herself. Jasper began to appear in the bar often, sometimes with a group to work with, sometimes just in the company of mates to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted aloof, not overtly sympathetic. Sometimes, though, Jane caught his eye. But Jasper turned away immediately, talking to someone else. And Jane wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to show her signs of attention, as visitors often did. And then Jane would let him know that she was interested in him. Once there was a girl in Jasper's company. Representatives of the fair half of humanity had come with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends of other members of the group. And this one was clearly something between them. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that. But sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she put her head right on his shoulder, and Jasper, usually cold and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling came into Jane's breast from behind the gate. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising meticulousness, Jane began to pick out her rival's faults. Too thin, not even pretty. That nose, long, liquid hair. Anyway, how can this madam compare to her, Jane? For the first time in her life, Jane seemed to feel smug about her appearance. Nature had endowed her, like Helene, with beauty. Jane had heard many compliments from others about her figure. Tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try her hand at modeling. Only this job was not to Jane's liking at all. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even considered it humiliating. And now, despite such impressive external data, the rival became such a gray mouse. In general, there was nothing outstanding in Jasper's companion, not even something to catch his eye. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. The presence of this girl made him happy. Jane watched Jasper closely and could tell this for sure: he loved his companion. It was painful. Thanks to the girl that Jasper was so attracted to, Jane had made up her mind, decided to do something she'd never considered unacceptable before. Her shift was coming to an end, but as usual she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of customers, and Jane waited for an opportune moment. She'd even had a few drinks beforehand for courage, to make her feel more confident and relaxed. Jasper stood up and headed for the exit. Someone had called him. The music was blaring in the bar. Impossible to talk on the phone in this environment. Everyone was either outside on the porch of the bar or in the smoking room. Jasper chose the street. Jane followed him like a shadow, now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to Jasper all evening remained at the table. She chatted cheerfully with his mates. It was obvious that they had all known each other for a long time. They must be in a long and serious relationship. Still, Jane would try, or she'd regret later that she'd never even tried. Jasper stepped out onto the porch. He paced the area in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Jane watched him through the large window. Jasper wasn't smiling, wasn't joking. Apparently the conversation was serious or unpleasant. It didn't matter. Jane would still approach him as soon as. Jasper pressed the reset button and was about to go back to the bar but at that moment Jane came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. "Hi," Jane smiled at him. Jane smiled at him. Jasper looked at her with interest. "We said hello," Jane nodded. "I need to talk to you." Jasper immediately tuned into the conversation. He showed that he was ready to listen. He could have dismissed her, or shown irritation or displeasure. But Jasper looked at her with his dark, intelligent eyes and waited. "I like you, and I've liked you for a long time," Jane decided to cut to the chase. "I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. I don't know what to do about it." Jane lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? Jasper was probably looking for words to reject her as politely as possible. He probably was. Jane suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of what she'd done. Why had she gone to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? Jasper often came to the bar. And then Jane felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Jane, her name came out of Jasper's lips and sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Jane, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. Jasper looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled after all. His eyes, the girl could see it clearly, shone with happiness. Sincere, real happiness. What's going on? Was he happy to hear her confession? Instead of words, Jasper kissed Jane. It made the girl dizzy. He had his arms around her. He held her, or rather even held her, because her legs were literally shaking from the kiss. Then he stroked her back and head and held her gently against him. I've been watching you for a long time, too, and I'm drawn to you in the same way. Then why? Jane didn't understand. I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't mean to embarrass you, Jasper said. You shouldn't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess? Is that about me? Jane asked. No, she admitted. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't realize it came from you. Oh yeah, it's just... What about that girl who came with you? Are you two together? Together, Jasper grinned. Ever since my parents brought me a pink bow tied to a box from the maternity ward and told me Lassie was my sister. So she's your sister? Jane laughed. I thought she was. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister and Sister, Jasper said, pulling Jane tighter against him and breathing in the scent of her hair. Passing through town. She's been married a long time, lives with her husband. Far away. She missed her wayward brother. Jane and Jasper started seeing each other. Turns out he'd been hitting on the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear message: a girl shouldn't be a loser. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing gigs, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And strange as it may seem for a rock musician, Jasper was shy with girls. No, he had a lot of friends with whom he could chat and laugh together. But Jane evoked a very special feeling in him. And that made Jasper, who was used to performing in front of hundreds of people, timid. But Jane made the first step, shattering all of Jasper's doubts. And now they were together. Jasper suggested they move in together. They decided on Jane's flat. Convenient location, reasonable price, cozy room. So it was Jasper who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself to pay the rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that Jasper is an excellent cook. Jane's culinary talents paled in comparison to his skills. Jasper, as befits a creative man, created real masterpieces, whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen. He was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes together they discussed the next song, spinning in Jasper's head and ready to be born. Sometimes Jane would suggest to her lover the right phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. How about it? She took part in the creation of a hit. Jane completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting Jasper, she didn't know what it was love for a man. She hadn't had time for that before. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looking at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and to melt from the touch of his warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you. Ellen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, you have your own measure of everything. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own flat. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands, It was hard for Jane to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him in some way. How? Where did Jane get the money? Jasper took out a loan, but it was a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him, the situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Jane offered to help. She had savings, money she'd put aside for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she was against for a long time, took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to cover the debt. From where? Jasper was surprised when Jane handed him several wads of brand new, crisp notes. I just got paid back out of the blue, plus the insurance. Finally paid off my mobile phone bill, she lied. She knew if she told Jasper the truth, he'd never take the money from her. As it was, it wasn't like it was the last, randomly coming in. Thank you, Jasper hugged Jane tightly. I'll pay you back. You'll see, we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back. Jasper paid the debt and continued to develop the group. Jane slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for her studies, and her salary had suddenly become much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that Jasper bought groceries and paid the rent of the flat. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. Jasper's income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unsteady income, but still the stream never dried up. Jane didn't worry about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed Jasper's attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, and support. Jane tried not to think about the future. But if she did not recover at the university this year, she would do it next year. It would be all right. She still had time. The main thing is that he, Jasper, is there for her. Jane hadn't realized she was capable of such feelings before. And then Jasper disappeared. No, he hadn't run away from Jane. Nothing terrible had happened to him. It started out as a business trip. Can you imagine Jasper grabbed Jane's shoulder and even shook her a little? His eyes burned like two bright spotlights. I was invited to New York to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, they liked me, and now they're inviting me. Jane couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band Jasper was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world, and they had noticed Jasper. They're offering him a collaboration. Unbelievable. I'm going to have to go away for a while, Jasper continued. Do you realize what that means? Jane nodded. She understood money, fame, dizzying opportunities for Jasper's growth and development as a musician, useful acquaintances and connections. Jasper would get things he'd never dreamed of. but it looks like they'll have to part ways indefinitely. After all, Jasper clearly said I have to leave, not we. The packing began. Jasper had a lot of things to sort out. Firstly, he had to find a replacement someone had to play in his band for him temporarily while he was away. Secondly, Jasper had to organize his passport and visa. Thirdly, collecting the necessary things. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Jane. Jasper was too absorbed in the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized that he would forget about her in another country, muffled by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps Jasper would even find someone there. But Jasper had hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. And time would fly by quickly. And then there's the video link. We'll be in touch with each other all the time. At least I'll finally earn a decent living, pay you back what I owe you. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy a flat. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know what to do and how to do it. It's going to be okay, Jasper said sincerely. Jane could see that he wasn't lying, wasn't deceiving. But something told her that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It was just that Jasper himself did not realize it yet. And that's how it turned out in the end. At first, Jasper called every day, as promised, and told her how he had settled down in his new place. Everything delighted him, and he was overwhelmed by the experience. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call himself, and he didn't answer Jane's calls. The long ring-back tones ended steadily with the message that the caller was probably busy, so he couldn't answer. Jane was alarmed at first. She thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw the band playing on the music channel. Jasper was with them. He looked different, older and more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut all ties, including forgetting about her. And Jane? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But Jasper was gone, completely out of her life. Jane made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every now and then she'd see Jasper. He was never the center of attention, but he was still caught in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often there was a girl next to him, the same one, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, colorful. Apparently there was something between her and Jasper, couldn't help but be. Jane was desperately jealous of Jasper, both of this girl and of the other potential women of her lover. She was hurt as she had ever been, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again, without the support, the warmth of a loved one, an unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems more pressing. Money. Jane was barely making ends meet. After all, she had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and turned it into a hookah lounge. Jane had to quit like all the other employees. Another blow. Jane had special memories and feelings about this place. And now the bar was gone, a cozy bar where she could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. Jasper would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. Jasper had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Jane had helped him out with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course he had no idea she'd been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Jane had no time to go over her grievances and think about what it would be like if she was in desperate need of a job, and preferably a decent paying one. And that's why she was tirelessly perusing the adverts. She wanted to find something that would help her get out of the financial hole. Good, at least the owner of the flat agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Jane would be asked to leave in a heartbeat. The ad caught Jane's eye with the amount of money they were offering for her services. Not a bad figure. It could solve a lot of the girl's problems, but the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to her. A carer was needed for a little girl. It didn't seem to specify the diagnosis, but whoever had advertised it had made it clear that the child needed round-the-clock care and supervision, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Jane reflected. She had experience in caring for babies. "Thank you, Ellen," to her mentor. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change them, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, apparently seriously ill. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Jane called the number given, and a pleasant male voice answered. The man asked her a few questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children. And she was invited for an interview. Jane was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Jane needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else would you find a salary like that? That's why Jane was worried, anxious. What if she didn't get the job? What then to look for a place as a waitress again? To work for a pittance? The taxi brought Jane to a country cottage village, an elite neighborhood, tall, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl was met by a woman, an au pair. As Jane found out later, in fact, the person who did everything: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, Kevin, was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. Kevin met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with light gray. An athletic figure. Yes, this man obviously paid attention to health and appearance. Jane was even embarrassed at first. How to start a conversation with someone like that? She suddenly seemed insignificant next to him. "Good morning," Kevin smiled warmly. Jane's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind Kevin seemed at once like a man of his own. "Hello," Jane smiled back. "I'm here to see you." "That's very good. I'll tell you straight away. I need a carer for my daughter, Melissa. She's in really bad shape right now. So it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Melissa, but how can I tell you this? There's a lot of pain in her life already, a lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you. Cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time." "Why? What's wrong with your girl?" Jane just couldn't help but ask the question. Kevin lowered his eyes. His face darkened in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. "Melissa, she's been tested everywhere. No one could figure anything out. It's like her body is destroying itself. There's no sign of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading, and nothing helps her." "Poor baby," Jane exclaimed. "The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see, but they're not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Melissa needs more than just a nanny. That's where we have Vivian, our favorite au pair. She'll feed her and give her medication on time, and we don't just need a carer either. Melissa has nurses to look after her and do all the necessary treatments. What Melissa needs is more like, a friend or something. Someone who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, I think you're just that young, beautiful, funny, and you have a kind look in your eye. You know how to empathize. That's good." Jane nodded. She was anxious to see the little girl. She needed positive emotions, and she would give them to her. Jane would cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness, brighten up the gray everyday life of the little patient, find a way to make her life more pleasant. "If you're ready to get to work right now," Kevin continued, "let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then it's up to Melissa to decide. Of course, you'll be paid for your time anyway. Do you agree?" Yes, Jane nodded. "That's good," Kevin said happily. "Then Vivienne will introduce you to Melissa. I've got to go, I've got things to do." As the door shut behind Kevin, Vivienne, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Jane with a question. "Have you ever interacted with little kids before? Do you know what little kids are like?" "I have nephews," Jane nodded. "That's good." Vivienne shook her head. "Except our Melissa, she's an unusual child. You realize that yourself." "I guess Melissa hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to keep her interested in anything, but you have to. Melissa needs to be distracted from her pain, from her torment, and she needs to be walked at least an hour a day. That's what the doctors said. I get it." "Well, let's go and meet her now," Vivienne said. Jane followed Vivienne to the first floor and entered the nursery. It was the princess's spacious room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little further away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? It was large, round, with a pink canopy. Jane looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it really all for one child? In the midst of this splendor, Jane did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. She was lying in bed surrounded by large, soft toys. There was a soft cat, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over its body, and a thin, pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost blending in with the white bedclothes because of her unhealthy skin color. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Melissa propped herself up on her elbows. The short conversation seemed to have drained her of her energy. Melissa sank down on the pillows and pulled the blanket over her skinny body, even though the room was warm. "Good," Jane agreed. She was surprised at the weakness of this 7-year-old. They seemed energetic, like Andrew, Jane's eldest nephew, who was just the same age as Annie. But you can't get him to sit still for 5 minutes. He's always up to something, making things up. If the boy were in this room, he'd be jumping on a trampoline or going down a slide. Lassie calls him a perpetual motion machine, and so does Lillian. Chris and Chris are the same, even though they're younger. Melissa, on the other hand, poor thing, is lying on her back. "What do you want to read?" "Princesses. There's a book on the windowsill." Vivienne started to read to me. "But she never has time," she said. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures. But the story itself seemed silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself did not like such fairy tales in her childhood. "Let's make up our own story about these princesses," Jane suggested. Melissa's tired eyes flashed with interest. "How?" she asked. "Very simple. I start, you continue." Melissa was fascinated by the activity. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She was riding in a racing car. The heroine was kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by a prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Melissa herself. Then Vivienne entered the room. Seeing that Jane and Melissa were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought lunch: mashed soup, stewed vegetables. "I don't want any," Melissa said, wincing. "I don't want anything. I don't want any of this." Vivienne looked at Jane, clearly expecting her to help. "Let me feed you." Jane turned to the girl. Each spoonful is another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine how much I'll have to tell you? Which do you think will finish first, your food or my imagination? It worked. The food ended faster than Jane's fantasy. But Melissa demanded more stories. Vivienne splayed her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse entered the nursery. Melissa immediately darkened. She was almost asleep. Lunch and history had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. "IVs?" she asked the nurse hopelessly. She nodded sympathetically. "I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You'll sleep later, and we'll have tea." Vivienne pulled Jane's sleeve. "Aren't you needed here now?" The AU pair led Jane into the spacious kitchen. Smoky cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. "You and Melissa are getting along, I see." The woman smiled, looking warmly at Jane. "That's good." Melissa kicked her previous nanny out, but she's taken to you. I've already called Kevin and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He said to keep you safe. I'm glad too. Jane smiled. Melissa is just too bad. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful, and she's lying in bed, not even able to play, nothing to play with. It's scary. What did the doctors say? Are there any chances? No prognosis. Vivienne shook her head. They can't even diagnose her. They just dismiss the symptoms, that's all. Melissa's going to be better after the drip. You can take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. Vivienne continued her story. Kevin, Melissa's father, I understand. Where's her mom? On a business trip. Does she have a demanding job too, so she can't babysit her daughter? Vivienne sighed. I wish. Lassie, Melissa's mom, isn't alive. The birth was complicated. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't realize the mother needed help. And Lassie wasn't complaining about anything, just worried about the baby. That's how it all worked out. The day after the birth, Lassie developed a high fever. Checkups, intensive care, one thing led to another. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Melissa in the NICU because she was born prematurely. It was a tough time. It's a shame, I agreed. That's a shame. Let me tell you the whole story, Vivienne said. It looks like you're going to be with us for a while, so you should know. Kevin grew up in a happy, full family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents. A room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays. Friends. Kevin had a happy childhood, no less happy youth. He graduated from high school with honors. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired Kevin the best tutors. And the boy studied English in foreign camps. He had a holiday and got an education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? Kevin's parents were old enough, they had not been able to have a child for many years. The couple resigned themselves to such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly gave them a surprise, finally gave them an heir. Needless to say, since then, all the attention of his mother and father indiscriminately belonged to Kevin. He was never shy of his parents, despite the fact that they were much older than the parents of his classmates. But Kevin, on the contrary, was proud of his parents. His father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of a regional hospital. They were known and respected by everyone. It never occurred to Kevin to be ashamed of his parents. Kevin grew up. His parents were rapidly aging, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and that was it. Kevin felt like an adult for the first time. After all, he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left him by inheritance. Since he was a teenager, Kevin had been interested in his father's business. He knew a lot of things, even had the right to sign. Yet for the first time, he had entrusted most of the processes to the board manager, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because Kevin needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. Kevin had just received his diploma, had just taken over his father's company, had just started to gain strength. And then there was another blow, Mom this time. The boy was left all alone. Kevin felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. It was good that Vivian, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known Kevin as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man who had lost both his parents one after the other. "It's been hard on him," Vivian shook her head. "He was just a boy, and here he was. It was his job that pulled him through. He had to make decisions, go places, hold meetings, sign contracts, that sort of thing. That's what saved him." It's been a while. Kevin turned from a young, inexperienced guy into an intelligent, purposeful man, a talented businessman. Vivian was pleased to see her mentee. He had grown older, stronger, more self-confident. The au pair wished Kevin would find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then Vivian's heart would be at peace. Only he didn't have anyone special. Vivian said no. There were some girls hanging around Kevin. He was a prominent, wealthy bloke. They're always popular. Except that one of them didn't work out, and he didn't feel anything for the other. They weren't to his heart's content. And Vivian didn't trust them. It seemed like all they wanted from him was money. They made eyes at him. And then Lassie showed up. Kevin met Lassie literally on the street. She was in a hurry to get somewhere, as it turned out later, for a job interview at Kevin's firm. Lassie had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked as an accountant for several years after college had suddenly closed. So Lassie was looking for a new position. Kevin went out for a walk to get some air. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And then fate collided the two men, literally. Lassie jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting Kevin. It was like a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Lassie's shoulder, its contents scattering across the pavement. Kevin and Lassie rushed to pick it up. The girl apologized. Kevin assured her it was all right and admired the stranger's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people had sorted out the bag and the things that had fallen out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Kevin, like a man, made the first move. He learned the name of the beautiful stranger and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked, getting to know each other. When Kevin found out that Lassie was rushing to his office, he realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was no accident that they met in such an interesting way, rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office. It was more romantic, more interesting, more pleasant. In short, it was a real romance. Vivian had never seen Kevin so happy. Lassie turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She quickly found a rapport with Vivian, too, which was important. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And just such a fate. Vivian shook her head sadly. A couple of years after they met, Kevin and Lassie got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious and happy. There was love, understanding, and respect between the couple. Vivian rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved Kevin and his wonderful, beautiful wife. They decided not to rush into having children. Vivian continued. It was their common decision. It was like they felt something. They traveled, worked, met friends. And I, the fool, was advising them in my senile way not to delay it. I wanted to babysit their baby. But Kevin and Lassie lived on their own for 5 years after they got married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away, later, until they were happy. And then the news of Lassie's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it. Well, it's about time, Lassie summarized. The baby decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Vivian shook her hands. I think you're going to have a boy. You look so pretty now, Lassie. Girls take beauty from their mothers when they're pregnant. But the AU pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Lassie was having a girl. A healthy, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb nowadays. I looked at her, and she looked just like Lassie. That's how Melissa was born, just like her mom. Melissa. It was Lassie who chose the name for her daughter. Kevin and Vivian didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy hadn't been easy. At first, Lassie was suffering from toxicosis. Then it seemed to recede, but it was replaced by other problems: high blood pressure, edema. The child developed well, but the mother suffered, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Lassie didn't even have the strength to go downstairs. Vivienne carried her food straight to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Lassie, helped her as much as she could, and assured her that things would not be easy after the birth of her daughter. Children are for women, Vivian sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Lassie. That depends. Jane shrugged, remembering her sister. Her children had been relatively easy. Anyway, Lassie had gone into labor much earlier than expected. The threat of miscarriage had been diagnosed throughout the pregnancy, so fortunately the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Melissa was born premature, weak. She didn't scream. She wasn't put on Lassie's chest. She wasn't even shown to her. Things are different when it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months. Melissa was immediately sent to the NICU. There was a fight for her life. And Lassie seemed fine at first. I mean, she was tired, of course, after giving birth. Well, she was worried about her daughter. She was worried sick. It's all understandable. Understandable and natural, Vivian said. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. It was only later that serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. Kevin and I were worried about the girl, Vivian said, almost crying. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it. We thought the baby wouldn't survive. She was born too early. She was too weak. And then, when in the morning Kevin received a call from the hospital and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. He thought it was Melissa. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Melissa had pulled through. She was a stronger girl. But Lassie was gone. Kevin went gray, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he'd gone too. Vivian stopped talking. But he did. I had work to do, Melissa to pull. To be honest, he hadn't been very good to his daughter at first. Vivian blamed Lassie for what happened to her. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't help it. She was just angry with her. Melissa was discharged home and a nanny was hired for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Vivian was too old for that. But she enjoyed playing with the girl. Melissa took her around the yard in her prom and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one. Well, God has heard my prayers, Vivian smiled. And Kevin had a beautiful Samantha. I can't take my eyes off her. Smart too. She's got a kid herself, a little girl a little younger than Melissa. It's a great family. Samantha got a job with Kevin, and it all started at some corporate event. It's pretty standard stuff. Samantha was good to Melissa. She often took her and her youngest daughter out to an amusement park or to the cinema. Melissa grew to love both Samantha and her little half-sister Annie. She was truly happy. Kevin and Samantha got married and started living together, and then Annie started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, no appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations of famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not make the correct diagnosis. The girl was melting before our eyes. The first year she was still fine. She was still on her feet. Vivian almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she was quite ill. And now I am so frightened for her. I don't know what kind of illness has attacked our little girl. Samantha and her daughter moved into her flat temporarily. Annie was in daycare, and it was too dangerous for Melissa to get infections from there. So Samantha and Kevin made that decision. And it comes from Samantha a lot. Every day almost, Vivian continued. She's a good girl. She brings Melissa fair gifts. She brings Annie some too when she's not sick. But when she went to the garden, it started. Sick day after sick day. So it turns out, they have a wife with one child separately, the husband with the eldest daughter separately. Such a family. Well, where to go? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Jane said. She was shocked by Kevin and Melissa's story. It's like a TV show. Well, that's just the way it is. The older woman waved her hands. Melissa, I see she's getting along with you, and that's good, she said. Everything will be nicer now. Days went by. Jane now lived in the room next to Annie's nursery, but the girl often asked Nanny to stay the night in her bedroom. Melissa had a very comfortable sofa there. Jane made herself a bed on it. They talked before bedtime, holding hands. Jane saw Melissa's problems. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. Kevin was a very caring and anxious father, a pleasant man to be around. They often had conversations about Melissa. The man always listened attentively to Jane, did not interrupt or argue, asked the right questions. Jane also got to know Samantha. Vivian was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a true queen. But when Samantha interacted with Melissa, when she adjusted Melissa's blanket, smiled and stroked her head, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was a hypocrite. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details as well. A cold glint in her eyes, a squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Jane had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room, ragged wallpaper, creaky floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window, through which nothing could be seen, and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Jane did not even realize where she had come from. Lassie appeared as if out of thin air. Jane recognized her because she had seen Melissa's mother in pictures. Lassie smiled sadly and looked at Jane with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Samantha. She's the trouble. She's dangerous." Lassie vanished into thin air. And Jane had so many questions she wanted to ask her. Watch her how? What? Was she dangerous? Jane woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if Jane had flown into her body, fallen into it. It was a strange sensation. Lassie's words were still echoing in her head. No, Jane didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream just wouldn't let go. The next day Samantha was gone, and Jane waited for her. She knew for sure this woman was involved in something bad. Samantha is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Melissa. She doesn't sympathize with the girl, she just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Vivienne. Samantha turned up the next day, as beautiful as ever, brightly colored, languid. First thing she did was go up to Annie's to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Melissa's thirsty," Samantha said, looking at Vivienne. "Let me make her some cocoa." "Come on," said the au pair, fussing. "No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her." "You're so thoughtful." Jane was silent. She watched Samantha like Lassie had asked her to in the dream. Somehow it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Lassie were there, telling her to be vigilant. Vivienne was tinkering with the test. Jane pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Samantha. And there she was, the woman deftly pulled a small vial from her sleeve, dripped a few drops into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple of seconds, a few deft movements, but Jane saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready." Samantha smiled. "Jane, hand me her favorite cup, please." Jane obeyed. She watched in silence as Samantha poured cocoa into Melissa's mug with a picture of Melissa's favorite cartoon characters, and realized Melissa shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She should act on it. Jane pretended to slip. She bumped into Samantha, who dropped the cup out of her hands, the mug falling and shattering. "Cocoa spilled on the floor?" "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Jane fidgeted, grabbed a rag, started wiping up the puddle, picking up the shards. "It's okay, I'll do it again." Samantha's voice was filled with poorly concealed irritation. Jane couldn't do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Melissa would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Samantha and Vivienne were at Melissa's, Jane squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. She needed to know exactly what Samantha had put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told her it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Jane saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained poison, deadly, causing symptoms similar to those of Annie. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her, just like in a fairy tale. Jane didn't know who to turn to with her news. Vivienne? What could she do? Kevin? He wouldn't believe her. What do we do? Samantha can't be allowed anywhere near the girl. She wants to send her to the afterlife, and she's almost succeeded in that endeavor. Still, Jane plucked up the courage to talk to Kevin. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Jane was afraid that he would shout, start to kick her out, or accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. "You know," Kevin said, looking at Jane, "I'd probably fire you right away if you'd said that." "It's very strange," agreed. "But just yesterday I had an unusual dream too, Lassie. And she asked me to trust you, just trust, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself for now and take some time off? I need to sort this out. Vera Antonovna will call you when you can go back to work." Jane spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at Kevin's house, and she was very worried about Melissa, who had already grown fond of her. But Kevin had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Vera Antonovna called. Jane, seeing her name on the screen, became anxious. What would they tell her now? How did it go? "Come over," was all Vera Antonovna said. "We have such a thing here. Come quickly. Melissa misses you. Very much." Jane didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was at Kevin's house. The owner opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. It was hard to guess from his appearance what had happened. "I want to thank you," the man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right. Samantha, she really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. That bastard wanted to poison Melissa?" Vera Antonovna shook her head. "You'd have to think. And I trusted her so much." The story turned out to be banal and as old as the world. Samantha was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Annie to be the sole heir to Kevin's fortune. Well, herself first, of course. Samantha had once trained as a pharmacist, but she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature has generously endowed her with beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other side of the world. A poison that's hard to find in blood and tissue unless you look for it. Samantha put the toxic substance in the food she cooked for Melissa, and the girl was weakening, slowly fading away. We were only a short distance away from the target. It's mind-boggling. It's unbelievable. Vera Antonovna could not calm down yet. Jane understood her. Indeed, Samantha's act was monstrous. How could she do such a thing to a defenseless child? Melissa trusted her, loved her. So Kevin installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turns out Samantha was poisoning Melissa's food every time she ate it. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she'd drip it from a vial into the food, probably prepared by the housekeeper. I used my own hands to take it to Melissa. The poisoned Vivian shook her head. Anyway, Samantha had been caught red-handed. She was under investigation. Annie was taken in by her father, a man who had wanted to have contact with the child for a long time, but he wasn't allowed to because he was too poor for it, too unworthy. Melissa, and everything will be fine, Vivian assured Vivian. It wasn't the child's fault that his mother wanted to do this. And Melissa, how is she? Jane asked. Melissa's fine. Came from somewhere behind her. Jane turned round and met Melissa's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she already had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctor said she'll recover quickly now. Vivian smiled. Jane and Jasper walked slowly along the shelves of the children's shop. It was the girls' section, so they both felt as if they were in a realm of pink and purple dolls, cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. When I was in San Francisco, a guy bought his nephew a voice-controlled robot. That's the stuff. Maybe Melissa would like something like that, Jasper suggested. She's a girl, Jane reminded him. And she definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast. It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves. Jasper put his hand on Jane's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but palpable push. A year ago, right after Melissa had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Jane had been in for another surprise. She continued to live next door to Melissa. She was quickly on the mend, mastered active games, asked to take her for walks all over Los Angeles. The girl was still very attached to Jane, and she still needed a job. And Jane had already got used to everyone to the girl Vivian. Even Kevin did not want to part with them. The adults had initially decided not to tell Melissa the truth about what had happened to her. Too terrible story. But the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, heard something, thought of something herself. It's just like in fairy tales. The girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers, and Jane was finally able to return to the university, chose a correspondence course, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like life in a family with relatives: sweet, cheerful Melissa, kind, wise Vivian, always busy, but polite and attentive Kevin. With these people, Jane was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They accepted her and were very grateful to her for saving Melissa. It's scary to think what could have happened if it hadn't been for that terrible dream. They discussed this unusual event. First, Lassie had dreamt about Jane, then Kevin. Vivian was sure of it. Lassie had broken through time and space to save her little girl. Kevin only shook his head and didn't offer an opinion. And Jane? She didn't know what to think. Perhaps Samantha had aroused her suspicions right away. After all, she hadn't liked Melissa's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Jane ran the thoughts through her head. It was possible that they'd been transformed into unusual dreams. Except Kevin had dreamed about Lassie too and asked him to believe Jane. That afternoon, Jane left the house alone. Melissa was studying. Vivian was doing chores around the house. Jane had to drive to the university to drop off some papers at the dean's office. Suddenly, Jasper stepped towards her. Jane couldn't believe her eyes. The sight of him made the hair on her head stand on end. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Jane as if there were no one more important to him in the world. "I found you at last," he said, and he held her close to him. Jane understood nothing, but she did not resist. She snuggled against the man she loved, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think of Jasper's betrayal, of his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. Jasper simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a boat trip. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Jane wasn't registered on social media, so he simply couldn't contact her. No way. Jasper wrote letters like the old days, letters and telegrams. But Jane had moved in with Kevin and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the letterbox and then somehow disappeared. "I remember this moment," Jane said. "I came home one day and saw that the letterbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe kids? Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, you never heard from me, so you thought I'd forgotten about you. Started a new life, betrayed." Jasper continued. "I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. It was unbearable without you, without news of you. But I knew I would have to wait, and then I would be financially secure for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I didn't realize how much trouble you were in. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know anything about you quitting your job. It's been so hard on you." That's it. Just an unfortunate coincidence. Jane was glad that her feelings and Jasper's were real, that there was no betrayal or deceit in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. Jasper now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money. Money, of course. Jasper had even managed to buy a flat for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. Jasper and Jane were married. They were already expecting a child. Jane felt happy and loved. She didn't work for Kevin anymore. And a stronger, more mature Melissa didn't need a 24-hour nanny. But they were all still friends. And right now, Jane and Jasper were picking out a 9th birthday present for Melissa that might not have been.